Chapter 672. The steam locomotive was like an awakening magical beast. White steam billowed from the chimney of the locomotive. The steam pushed the pistons to move, and the train began to creak as it waited for its first departure. "It's really moving." The Hill's eyes lit up. The white steam made the room a little hot and humid. After hesitating for a moment, she grabbed the handle and sat down behind Meg. If the steam engine could change the world as Meg and Hader had said, then this so-called train in front of her would be the first step to changing the world. Although the Buffett Bank was still developing vigorously, she could already foresee the limits of its future. However, if she could be the first to master the steam engine and use it, then a world of infinite possibilities would open up before the Buffett family. Becoming the president of the Aden Chamber of Commerce was a small goal for her at the moment. If she seized this opportunity, then it might become something she could easily achieve in the future. Of course, the most important thing right now was whether or not the train could even move. "Although the train is very safe, Miss Hill, please sit tight," Meg reminded her warmly. His hand was holding the lever, and his heart was pounding. He wasn't an experienced driver, but since he was able to create this little train, he naturally knew how it worked. The foolproof way of operating it wasn't difficult, but the feeling of being able to push the world forward with just a push of the lever made him feel a little nervous. He couldn't predict the impact of the steam train in the world of magicians. Since there's no other choice, then let's change the world. Meg took a deep breath and pushed the lever forward. The gears engaged, and the little train shook violently. The connecting rod connected to the pistons began to move the wheels forward, and the train began to slowly accelerate on the track. The Hill's eyes widened. Her face was full of shock and disbelief. Without any external force to push it, the heavy iron car actually started to move along the track with the two people on it. Although she had been listening to Hader's reports all these years and had some understanding of the steam engine, when she saw that the light steam could produce such a huge amount of energy that could be controlled and used, the Hill's heart was still pounding. She couldn't understand what kind of process this was, but she knew that if this energy was stable and reliable, then all the work that required strength and simple reciprocation could be replaced by the steam engine. In that case, the world would be completely changed. The Hill couldn't imagine what a huge market this would be. However, she clearly knew that this technology had to be the first to be grasped. And this would be the most powerful opportunity in the next few decades, or even centuries. Coal was completely worthless, and there was almost an endless supply of it in the wilderness of Chaos City. The speed of the little train wasn't very fast. Although the hot and humid steam was vented to the side, the room was limited, and a lot of steam still hit their faces. The experience wasn't very good, but as the first demonstration of a steam engine in this world, it was naturally enough. After circling the room once, Meg pulled back the lever and isolated the steam and the fire source. The little train slowly came to a stop. The whole room was already shrouded in steam. Although it was hot and humid, it also had a celestial feel to it. Meg alighted from the train and then opened the door for the Hill. He helped her out of the car. Both of their clothes and hair were wet from the hot steam, but they were a little excited at the moment, so they didn't care at all. "Mr. Meg, this is really a creative invention. You will definitely be recorded as an inventor in the history of the Norland continent." The Hill looked at Meg with undisguised admiration and praise in her eyes. "Actually, I'm just a chef," Meg said modestly. "As a top chef, you can only be described as a genius to be able to come up with such a creative invention in machinery." The Hill looked at Meg. He had brought her too many surprises, and today's steam engine locomotive had completely subverted her worldview and imagination. Meg wasn't disoriented by the praise. He looked at the Hill and went straight to the point. "It is indeed a happy thing to hear Miss Hill's praise. However, I wonder if Miss Hill is interested in this steam engine and steam engine locomotive, or do you have any intention of cooperating with me? It is indeed a very impressive thing to be able to operate a car with just coal. However, whether it can be successfully promoted and used on a large scale will still require time and continuous testing. There are quite a lot of risks involved." The Hill looked at Meg and pondered for a while before saying, "Buffett banks can invest 10 million copper coins to buy out all of Mr. Meg's steam engine and steam engine locomotive technology and bear all the risks. Although she was sure that this was a very strong opportunity, the Hill didn't speak too confidently. Promoting something that had never been seen in this world would require a lot of risk. If it was successful, it could go straight to the top. If it failed, it could be a total loss. As a businessman, risk control was the most basic thing. 10 million copper coins is indeed a large sum. It seems like Miss Hill also agrees that this technology will have a great impact on the existing industries in this world. Meg looked at the Hill and shook his head. However, this is not the way I want to cooperate. I am cooperating with Miss Hill because of Buffett Bank's strong power and network. What I value is the future of this technology. The Hill's expression had already become a little solemn. After thinking for a while, she said, I wonder what kind of cooperation Mr. Meg intends to have. My expectation is to have a three-way cooperation with the City Lord's Castle and Buffett Banks. I will provide the technology, Buffett Banks will provide the funds, and the City Lord's Castle will provide the resources and protection. Together, we will develop and operate steam locomotives and steam engines. Meg reached out to hold the slightly hot steam locomotive at the side. His gaze followed the tracks, and there was a look of anticipation on his face. If you want to lay a railway network that covers the entire Norland continent and revitalize the transportation and freight of the entire world, funds and technology alone are far from enough. The Hill looked at Meg, and her eyes gradually lit up. Her gaze also became a little different. As a chef, Meg had shown a genius talent in machinery, but at the end of the day, he was still a businessman. A businessman with great foresight and a big picture view. She rarely admired others, but at this moment, she had a faint feeling of admiration for Meg. Are you sure the City Lord's Castle will be involved? The Hill asked. Chapter 673. Hill looked at Meg in silence for a while. The white mist had yet to disperse, and the man standing in front of her seemed to be shrouded in a layer of mist. She couldn't see through him for a while. Meg also quietly looked at Hill, waiting for her answer. Mr. Meg's proposal is beyond my expectations, but I do have a lot of interest in steam engines and steam locomotives. If you can cooperate with the mayor's office, it's not impossible. Shear looked at Meg with a serious expression and said, however, I have a condition. The Buffett Banks must have the right to operate the steam locomotive and the priority to use the steam engine. Otherwise, I cannot guarantee that this plan will be approved by the bank. I suggest that we discuss these conditions when the three parties have a discussion. The mayor's office shouldn't compete with you for the right to operate the business. Meg nodded and didn't directly agree. Okay, then Mr. Meg will negotiate with the mayor's office. I look forward to the day when the three parties have a discussion. Hill nodded and flicked her wet hair. She smiled charmingly and said, Mr. Meg, you chose such a closed place and made me wet. In order to ensure the confidentiality of the steam engines and steam locomotives, I had no choice but to do so. Please forgive me, Miss Hill. Meg smiled a little awkwardly. This girl was really difficult to deal with. If someone who didn't know heard this, they would think that he had done something indescribable to her. Then let's go out first. Meg raised his hand and waved. He walked in the direction of the door first. The humidity in the air was still very high. His clothes were soaked, half from sweat and the other half from steam. Meg opened the door and came out of the room with Hill. Boss? Sally's surprised voice sounded. Meg looked and saw that Sally and Barbara had just walked to the door. They looked at the two of them at the same time, and their expressions were a little strange. Mag and Shear were both drenched, and their clothes were clinging tightly to their bodies. Their hair was also a little messy, and they looked a little messy. The two of them came out of the abandoned house together. Their current appearance could not help but cause one's imagination to run wild. Could it be that the boss and Miss Hill have some unspeakable secret? The Hill and Barbara could not help but think of this at the same time. Humph, men. Barbara looked at Meg with some disdain. He was already Amy's father, but not only did he not mention Amy's mother, he was even fooling around outside. How shameless. What a pleasant and memorable private meeting, Mr. Meg. See you next time, Hill said with a smile as he glanced at Sally and Barbara. Okay, goodbye. Meg nodded slightly, but his face darkened a little. This girl was just saying nonsense. It was clearly a business matter, but she used the word private meeting to cause one's imagination to run wild. After watching Hill get into the luxurious horse-drawn carriage, Meg looked at Sally and Barbara with a smile. Why did you come back? Aren't you going to stay with Mia for a while? If we didn't come back, we wouldn't have known that someone was secretly having a private meeting with another woman in the room next door, Barbara said with a little disdain. She especially emphasized the word private. Looks like I'll have to report it in advance next time. Otherwise, our princess will be angry, Meg said with a smile. Why did this girl have an inexplicable sense of jealousy? He locked the door behind him and walked in the direction of the dining room. I don't care what you do. Barbara crossed her arms in front of her chest and snorted in a tsundere manner. Mia told us to come back and get some ingredients for making ice cream. The ice cream shop is doing too well this morning, so she's worried that there won't be enough ingredients, Sally explained to Meg. I see. I'm going out for a while, so I'll give them to her on the way. Also, with her speed of making ice cream, even if the shop is always full, the ingredients shouldn't be too far behind. Meg nodded and opened the door to the dining room. All right, then we'll continue to help. Sally nodded and turned to leave. Big sister Sally, aren't we going in to take a look? What if he's going to mess around again? Barbara looked at Sally with a hesitant expression. Boss must be going to take a shower and change his clothes now. Do you want to go in and take a look? Sally looked at Barbara with a smile. How could he do such a thing in broad daylight? I don't want to see it. Barbara blushed and shook her head firmly before following Sally away. I have to discuss this with grandfather. Perhaps he'll be able to make a better judgment. In the horse-drawn carriage, Hill had already changed his clothes, and his beautiful brows were tightly furrowed as he murmured to himself. That's a good start. Now, it's time to tell the City Lord's castle the story. Meg took a shower and changed into a clean set of clothes, and instantly felt a lot more refreshed. Although he didn't get any promises from Hill in the morning, he could tell that Hill knew the value of the steam engine and the train, and definitely wouldn't let go of this opportunity. As long as the City Lord's castle was on board, with the steam engine as the core, Meg would successfully tie Buffett Bank and Chaos City together into an interest group. As long as the core technology was in his hands, even if something like 4 years ago happened again, these two parties would have no choice but to stand on his side. This would be the foundation for him to establish himself on the Norland continent, and also one of the reasons why he would have the confidence to get rid of his enemies one by one in the future. This was the real reason why Meg was pushing for the steam engine despite the system's objections. After going downstairs to get some ingredients for making ice cream, Meg rode his bicycle to the ice cream shop first. There was still a line outside the ice cream shop, and it was already full inside. Although it wasn't as grand as the hundreds of people lining up outside Amy's, there were still more than 10 people lining up at this time, and more people were joining the line one after another. It was clear that the ice cream shop's business was doing very well. Meg carried the ingredients into the shop, and some of the regulars greeted him with smiles. He responded to them one by one. After handing the ingredients to Yabamiya, he went out again, and rode his bicycle straight to the City Lord's castle. What are you doing here, Mr. Mac? Meg had just arrived at the entrance of the City Lord's castle, and Dykus had also just alighted from a horse-drawn carriage. He was just about to walk into the City Lord's castle when he caught sight of Meg. He paused momentarily, and then smiled as he said, By the way, I heard that you won a shop from head chef Beat yesterday. You must be here to prepare for the transfer of ownership, right? Chapter 674. By the time Meg emerged from the City Lord's castle, it was already close to noon. Due to the fact that he had pasted a leave of absence notice on his door, he changed his clothes before visiting a few detective agencies and news agencies to provide some information, as well as buy some information. As expected, I've attracted a lot of interest after making such a high-profile appearance yesterday. I can't reveal Noah Gould's name for now, but some people will most likely spread the news even further. All I have to do is wait for the young master of the Barclay family to come knocking on my door. Meg tore the piece of paper in his hand into shreds before tossing them into a nearby ditch. He then entered an alley and changed back into his own clothes. He found a random noodle shop and had a bowl of tasteless noodles before preparing to go home. Ding! System has issued a new mission. Please head to the food market and purchase the ingredients required for 3 dishes. Requirements. All of the ingredients purchased must be of the highest quality in the entire food market. If the mission is successful, 0.5 strength point will be rewarded, and if the mission is failed, 0.5 strength point will be deducted. Right at this moment, the system's voice suddenly sounded. Meg stopped in his tracks with a perplexed expression. System, aren't you a vegetable seller? Why are you suddenly asking me to buy ingredients from other places? This doesn't conform to your concept of selling vegetables. Furthermore, the quality of the ingredients in the food market is far inferior to the ones you provide. If the restaurant were to suddenly change the quality of the ingredients, the customers would definitely immediately notice. Only high-quality ingredients can create the most delicious food, and selecting high-quality ingredients is a basic skill for a chef. However, the host is clearly very lacking in this area. This mission is a supplementary mission for the trip to Rendezvous, so the host must master the ability to select ingredients before setting off for Rendezvous. During your stay in Rendezvous, the system will not provide you with any ingredients aside from condiments and spices. The system's serious voice sounded. I see. Meg's expression also became a little serious. He already understood the system's intentions. He had always relied on the system to provide him with the most perfect ingredients. Due to the fact that the restaurant was completely closed off from the public, even if someone were to suspect his source of ingredients, he could always find a way to evade them. However, if he were to go to Rendezvous to celebrate the king's birthday, there was no way that he would be able to bring his own ingredients. Instead, he would have to use ingredients provided by others. At this time, the selection of ingredients was undoubtedly a very important skill. 0.5 physique points as a reward. It's rare for the system to be so generous. In that case, I won't stand on ceremony, Meg said with a smile. He rode his bicycle in the direction of the wet market. Meg spent a silver coin to ask the guard at the entrance of the market to look after the bicycle for him. Then, he went straight into the market. The food market in the Aden Square was the largest comprehensive food market in Chaos City. Almost all of the food that could be found in Chaos City could be found in this food market. Come. A freshly killed, third-grade black rock python. Beneath its rock-hard skin is tender and plump snake meat. If I miss this opportunity, I don't know when I'll be able to encounter it again. A tall beast man stood beside a skinned python and yelled loudly. The python was as thick as a bucket and hung on the rack. It was more than 10 meters long and was dripping with blood. It looked a little scary. A squirrel that's alive and kicking. It's an excellent choice whether to kill it for barbecue or raise it as a pet. There are only 3 left. One of the elves was carrying a cage in his hand. Inside the cage were 3 squirrel-like creatures that were jumping up and down. They looked quite clever and cute, attracting the attention of a few children who were standing to the side to watch. The boss ran away with his sister-in-law, so we don't have any money to pay our workers. We can only sell our first-grade magic beast mantis shrimps. 150 copper coins per caddy until they are sold out. A few dark-skinned, middle-aged men were holding banners with pots of red freshwater prawns in front of them. They were shouting the slogan in tears. Meg looked at the mantis shrimps, which were comparable in size to Australian lobsters, waving their large pincers. They really do look quite naughty. However, this slogan sounded a little familiar. Be careful. The turkey is coming. At this moment, a nervous cry sounded. A turkey, which was as tall as a person, suddenly rushed out of a shop. It was burning with flames as it rushed along the passage. A bare-chested big man with a knife in his hand chased after it. He shouted to be careful, and his face was full of anxiety. The people along the way hurriedly got out of the way. The market suddenly became a mess. The turkey was a magic beast. If they were touched by it, ordinary people wouldn't be able to bear it. Meg happened to be in the passage. He looked at the turkey running wildly. Then, he looked at the old man and old woman behind him who were supporting each other. He frowned. The turkey was an ingredient for braised chicken. The first time he went out to hunt, he was almost killed by the turkey. It was very dangerous, and it was even more dangerous in this crowded market. The management of the market had already run in this direction. The passers-by were also ready to take action, but for the old couple behind Meg, it might be too slow. The fiery breath had already hit them in the face. The flamingo's body was burning with red flames, and its slightly open mouth was flashing with magma-like red liquid. "Lend me a knife." Meg reached out and took a knife from the knife rack of the uncle who was selling kitchen knives, and took a step forward. The knife flashed, and Meg had already passed by the turkey. The head of the turkey flew high and then rolled to the ground. The fierce turkey rushed forward 2 steps and then fell to the ground. The flames on its body also disappeared. "Who?" The chicken butcher who came with the knife breathed a long sigh of relief. If something happened, then he wouldn't be able to survive in this market. "Brother, you are really skilled in killing chickens." The big man looked at Meg and gave him a thumbs up with gratitude. "Practice makes perfect. Practice makes perfect." Meg cupped his hands and then returned the knife to the uncle who was completely stunned. He smiled and said, "The knife is very good, thank you." "You're welcome, you're welcome." The uncle quickly shook his head. Suddenly, there was a burst of applause. Everyone looked at Meg with appreciation. Many people came forward and began to ask the price of the knife. Meg smiled and then continued to stroll in the market. Meg had been to this market several times. Every time, he was dazzled by the dazzling array of magical beast ingredients. If these things were placed on Earth, they would be protected wild animals, and their level would not be low. Chapter 675. Lake Mwasa was the largest freshwater lake near Chaos City. There were all types of fish in the lake, and what was most peculiar was that there were no magic beasts around. Even for normal people, it was an extremely safe place. The Buffett family had a manor on the western outskirts of Chaos City, which was situated next to Lake Mwa. There were a few intricate small buildings situated beside the lake, surrounded by a bamboo fence. There was a large tree beside the lake. The tree was slightly slanted, and it suddenly twisted in a crooked manner toward the surface of the lake. It was like a large umbrella that was propped up beside the lake, shielding the eyes from the piercing autumn sun at noon. At this moment, there was a white-haired elderly man sitting on a small stool beneath the tree. He had a fishing rod in his hand and was staring intently at a white buoy on the surface of the lake. "Grandfather, do you think this is worth the risk for us?" Hill stood beside the elderly man and asked in a quiet voice. "Sure, it's about to bite," the elderly man replied in a gentle voice. The old man said softly, his hand already lightly grasping the fishing rod on the shelf at the side. The white buoy trembled, moving left and right on the surface of the water. Then, it suddenly sank down, as if it was being pulled down by something heavy. The fishing line was also pulled taut all of a sudden. "It's taken the bait." An elated look appeared on Hill's face. She looked at the surface of the lake with a nervous expression and urged, "Hurry up and pull it up, grandfather." "Don't worry, this is a big fish. The bigger the fish, the more patient we have to be. Otherwise, the fishing rod and line could easily snap. Not only would we fail to catch the fish, but we'd also lose a fishing rod. That wouldn't be ideal." The elderly man gripped onto the fishing rod tightly with a smile and began to walk the fish in an unhurried manner. "Patience?" Hill faltered slightly as she looked at the large fish bobbing up and down on the surface of the lake. She suddenly didn't know if she was the big fish or the person holding the fishing rod. She had once been the one in charge, but it seemed to have disappeared with Meg. The fish that had been hooked was walked on the surface of the lake for over 10 minutes before it was slowly pulled to the shore. The elderly man scooped it up with his fishing net, and it was a large red carp that weighed over 10 kilograms. "We're in for a treat this afternoon. This is the first red carp of this size this year." Ian looked at the big carp in the net with a smile on his face. He looked up at the hill and said, "Little Hill, let's have lunch here today. Your luck has always been good." "All right, since Grandpa said the fish is good, it can't be wrong." A smile appeared on Hill's face as he followed Ian to the house. In business, some money should be earned by others. Otherwise, the business will be gone sooner or later. However, it's very important who you work with. If your character isn't good, you can't work with him even if there's money to be made, Ian said with a smile as he walked. Hill nodded thoughtfully. "Can the newly brewed wine be taken out of the cellar?" Ian suddenly asked. It'll take a few more days. I'll ask them to send it to you when it's out of the cellar. Bill looked at Ian with a puzzled expression and said, But there are still some older wines in the cellar. Why don't you like them, Grandpa? I like the freshness of the wines that have just been taken out of the cellar. After a while, I don't like them. Ian shook his head. Speaking of which, the wine that Mr. Meg adds to the steak may be of better quality than the wine produced by the manor. It's just that he doesn't sell it to the public. He only uses it to make steak. Hill knew that Ian was a true wine lover. In order to drink wine that he liked, he was willing to spend decades, invest a lot of money, and put in a lot of effort to establish the best winery on the entire continent. He was the only one who could do something like that. Really? Ian stopped in his tracks. He didn't lose his composure even when he heard about the various magical things about the steam locomotive. Now, he was like a fighter who had his interest piqued. The steak that he adds his own red wine tastes better than the best red wine from our manor. The wine aroma is also more intense. Hill nodded. Interesting. Ian nodded with a smile and continued to walk forward. City Lord, if Mr. Meg really does invent the steam engine and put it to use, it could change many things. Perhaps it could be an opportunity for the development of our Chaos City. In the City Lord's castle's office, Dicus looked at Michael, who had just returned, with an excited expression. Michael sat behind his desk with furrowed brows. After a long silence, he shook his head and said, Don't jump to conclusions before we see the actual product. However, if the Buffett family is willing to join us, they'll bear most of the risks. Are we going to Amy's now? Dicus was still very excited. He had been following the progress of the Hater team for the past few years, so he was well aware of the impact that the steam engine could have on this world. Don't be in such a hurry. I still have 2 meetings to attend, so we'll go over tonight. Michael shook his head and walked toward the door. When he passed by Dicus, he stopped with a smile and said, I know you're very excited, but don't tell Hater and the others about this, and don't let anyone else know about it. Yes. Dicus was slightly taken aback, but he quickly nodded. Meg walked around the market, and he had a rough idea of what dishes were available, where they were, and what the quality of the dishes were. What a pity. With the cooking skills of this world, there probably aren't many people who can cook these dishes, Meg thought to herself. Mag thought to himself with a slightly wistful expression. He was a little dazzled by the variety of ingredients available, and at the same time, he was looking forward to creating new recipes using ingredients from this world after he had mastered the art of cooking. Have you seen a lobster the size of an adult before? I wonder if the spicy one or the garlic-flavored one tastes better, Meg murmured to himself. After settling down, he had already decided on all of the ingredients that he needed to buy. Seeing as the system had told him that he needed 3 dishes, he decided to make 3 dishes: spicy grilled fish, braised chicken and rice, and black pepper steak. The iridescent scale fish was a hybrid fish created by the system and didn't exist in this world. Meg squatted in front of a seafood stall for half an hour before choosing a fish known as the Kirin grass carp. This type of fish had thick scales, and its flesh was very tender and delicious. The fish bones were quite large, and they were arranged in a regular pattern. As Meg watched the stall owner slaughter the fish, he had already come up with a plan to remove the bones. It should be enough to cook spicy grilled fish. There's only one ironhide bowl in the entire market, so just get them to prepare a fresh ironhide bowl for me when we get to Rodu. Mission accomplished, right? Ding. According to the system's analysis, the ingredients purchased by the system are of high quality. Seeing as the quality of the ironhide bowl is too low and there is no room for selection, the system has deemed the mission a success. Ding. 0. 5 physical strength has been issued. Does the host wish to activate it now? The system's voice rang out. I refuse. Meg refused without any hesitation. He didn't want to be struck by lightning in front of so many people, so he didn't want to be struck by lightning and become an idiot. With the addition of 0. 5 physical strength, I'll have 4 physical strength points, which means I have the strength of a 4th tier knight. With Meg and Alex's swordsmanship, I'll be able to protect myself on the Norland continent. Meg thought to himself as he clenched his fists. From now on, he didn't have to hide behind Amy anymore. Instead, he could become Amy's protective umbrella. After exiting the market, Meg went straight back to the restaurant. It was already past 2 in the afternoon, so the restaurant was quite empty. Meg had just poured himself a glass of water when a knock sounded on the door. Meg put down the glass of water and opened the door to find Blower and Anna standing at the entrance. "What are you two doing here?" Meg asked with a smile. Blower had been bringing Anna over for meals quite often recently. The little girl was very obedient and had become good friends with Amy. Meg was quite sympathetic toward her, but this wasn't the time for a meal. Meg looked at Meg with a resigned expression and said, "Mr. Mack, I have to go out for a while, so I can't take Anna with me. She doesn't want to stay at the Elven Embassy, so I could only send her to you. Would you be able to look after her for a few days?" "Uncle Meg, I want to learn how to cook from you." "Can I?" Anna looked up at Meg with a determined expression. Meg looked at Anna, then at Blower. "That's not what I want. I want her to be a quiet little beauty." Blower shrugged. Meg looked at Anna again. She was still very young, but she was looking at Meg with a determined expression. Furthermore, there seemed to be a glimmer of light in her eyes. "Anna, do you really want to learn how to cook?" Meg looked at Anna with an equally serious expression.
Yes.
Anna nodded with a serious expression, without any hesitation. A smile appeared on Meg's face as he nodded, and said, "All right. If you're willing, you can learn how to cook from me from today onward. As long as you're willing to learn, I'll continue to teach you how to cook." "Thank you, Uncle Meg." Anna spread open her arms and threw herself toward Meg. Meg squatted down and also gave Anna a gentle hug. He patted the sobbing little girl's back as he said in a gentle voice, "However, cooking is very difficult. You have to learn to persevere and be strong." "Yes, yes, I will." Anna stood up straight again, and tears welled up in her eyes. However, she forced them back as she nodded vigorously. Could it be that my peerless beauty can't compare to this guy?" Blower looked at Anna, who was looking at Meg with reverence in her eyes, and thought to himself with a hint of indignation in his heart. "All right, have some water first. I have some things to discuss with Blower." Meg carried Anna to a nearby chair with a smile and placed a cup of water in front of her. He then gestured for Blower to come over to the door and asked, "How long are you going to be away for?" "I might have to go on a long journey in half a month, so it won't be convenient for me to take Anna with me. Barring any mishaps, I should be back in 5 days. If anything happens, Anna will be raised by Mr. Mack. I know you're a good person." Blower looked at Meg with a nonchalant expression. "Why are you giving me the good person card?" Meg rolled his eyes. He looked at Blower for a while before shaking his head and said, "I'll give you 6 days." "All right." Blower smiled and waved at Anna as he said, "Goodbye, Anna." Chapter 677. Meg and Anna sat with a glass of water between them, staring at each other in silence for more than 10 minutes. "Uncle Meg, are we going to start learning how to cook now?" Anna couldn't help but break the silence in a low voice. "Yes, learning how to cook is a gradual process. Anna has never learned before, so let's start with knife skills. This is a basic skill." Meg also came back to his senses. It was not an easy task to teach a 5- or 6-year-old girl who had never held a knife to cook. The difficulty level was much higher than teaching Yabamiya how to make ice cream. Okay. Anna stood up and nodded. Her eyes were filled with anticipation. "I hope this enthusiasm can be maintained for a long time." Meg thought to himself. Having enthusiasm was a good thing. After all, when he was chopping vegetables in the test field for the god of cookery, he almost went crazy. He deeply understood how boring it was to practice knife skills. "System, give me a small apron and a set of small knives suitable for Anna," Meg said in his heart as he walked towards the kitchen. According to the system's judgment, the trainee is too young to be a chef. It is recommended that the host does not accept her as a disciple. The system's warning sounded. "Then why did you choose a disabled person?" Meg rolled his eyes. Although the host's body was disabled at that time, this body had great potential. That was why the system chose her. The system retorted, "Now that I think Anna has great potential to become an excellent chef when she grows up, I want to teach her how to cook. There's nothing wrong with this logic, right?" Meg said with a smile. The system fell into silence. Give me a price. I don't have time to dawdle with you. Meg interrupted the system's silence. A small apron and a set of scaled-down kitchen utensils. The total is 1,001 copper coins. In view of the host's good reputation, the system reluctantly erased the small change. The total is 1,000 copper coins. The system was silent for a while and said with a painful tone, "Deal." Meg thought for a while and was too lazy to bargain. He directly nodded. Ding. 1,000 copper coins have been successfully deducted. The apron and kitchen utensils are in the process of being ordered. They will be delivered in 3 minutes. Host, please confirm the delivery location. Just put it on the counter. If there's another delivery error, I'll return it, Meg said coldly. This damn system, it was always careless when delivering items. Meg glanced around the kitchen. This was an adult's kitchen. The size of the kitchenware and the height of the stove were beyond Anna's reach. Then Meg's gaze fell on the small stool at the side, which was usually used by Amy to step on when she washed her hands. Since Anna wanted to learn how to cook and not play house, then it would be best not to make the kitchen into a DIY type, which would make it seem undignified and unserious. Therefore, he should let her adapt to the kitchen, not let the kitchen adapt to her. Anna, try this small stool and see how high it is when you stand on it. Meg turned around and waved at Anna, who was standing at the door. Anna obediently climbed onto the small stool. The little girl was about a head taller than Amy, so when she stood on the small stool, her hands were just above the height of the stove. Cutting vegetables was not a problem for her. Very good. From today onwards, this will be your workbench. Meg nodded with satisfaction. At least it was enough for the knife skills stage. Hearing the system's prompt, Meg smiled and said, Anna, come out with me. I have 2 small gifts for you. Okay. Anna curiously followed Meg out of the kitchen. Meg first took out a pink apron from the counter, accompanied by a pink hood. It's so beautiful. Anna's eyes lit up when she saw the apron in Meg's hand. There will be a lot of oil and smoke in the kitchen, so we need to wear an apron to prevent our clothes from being stained by oil. Anna, try it on and see if it fits. Meg smiled and helped Anna put on the apron. Anna was wearing a light blue dress today, which was very tight, so it was just right to put the apron on. Wearing the pink apron and her hair was wrapped in a pink hood, Anna stood there, just like a little cook. Well, it's really beautiful, and it fits you just right. Meg nodded with satisfaction. Thank you, Uncle Mag. Anna looked down at her little apron with a smile on her face. Other than the apron, I have a gift for you. Meg took out a dark brown wooden box from the counter, squatted in front of Anna again, and opened the lid. Wow! The shiny knives were a little dazzling, but Anna opened her eyes wide and stared at the knives in the box, which were slightly smaller than normal knives. Are these really for me? Anna raised her head and looked at Meg in disbelief. Of course. Having your own set of knives is the first step to becoming a chef. Meg nodded with a smile. Thank you, thank you. Anna's eyes turned red immediately, and she bowed deeply to Meg. I'm super strict when it comes to cooking. You'll probably think I'm despicable in the future. Meg smiled and rubbed the little girl's hair. The little girl was so sensible that it made people feel sorry for her. No, I'll definitely learn to cook well. Anna shook her head seriously, holding the box of knives in her arms. Then let's start with knife skills. The so-called knife skills are to use a knife to process the ingredients into the desired shape. For example, when cooking Yangzhou fried rice, you need to cut all the ingredients into the size of rice grains. Meg opened the refrigerator, looked at Anna, and then closed it again. He took 2 potatoes that he had bought from the market today from the counter. After washing them, he placed one in front of Anna and the other on the chopping board in front of him. He pulled out the gold-rimmed kitchen knife from the knife rack and said with a serious expression, Now, let's cut this potato into the size of a grain of rice. How should I do it? Anna stood on the small stool and looked at Meg attentively. How could such a big round potato be cut into the size of rice grains? It was unbelievable. Watch carefully, Meg reminded her. The kitchen knife fell, and a thin potato slice was cut off. Then, the second and third slices fell, and the potato slices of uniform thickness were cut out as if they had been measured with a ruler. The kitchen knife made steady and even sounds on the chopping board. The speed was not fast, but it made people feel steady and comfortable. Soon, the potato slices turned into thin filaments and then into golden granules the size of rice grains. Wow, so awesome! Chapter 678. Young Master, you shouldn't go back on this trip. At the back gate of the Elven embassy, Ingve looked at the beautiful young woman on horseback with a concerned expression. Isn't young Master Blower still in the embassy? Blower looked at Ingve with a relaxed smile and said, I'm just going back, so I might not do anything. Perhaps I won't even run into them, so you don't have to worry. Young Master, if your identity is exposed, not only will those villains not spare you, but there will also be many people in the Elven race who will want your life. That would be very detrimental to our Bybili family. Ingve still wore a concerned expression. Don't worry, even if I die, I won't drag the entire family down with me. Let's go. Blower raised a hand and urged his horse to gallop away. Sigh. Ingve stood at the door for a long time before heaving a faint sigh. If I were 300 years younger, perhaps I would have accompanied young Master Blower on this trip. Receiving praise for his delicious dishes was already a common occurrence for Meg. However, very few people were able to appreciate or praise his culinary prowess. Therefore, the little lowly Anna looked at him with a face full of admiration. Her gaze and words did not hide her admiration for him at all, making him feel as if he was floating. Even the kitchen knife in his hand unconsciously became lighter. He withdrew his cleaver, and the large round potato had been reduced to a pile of rice-sized potato kernels, all of which were very evenly distributed. Anna, practice cutting potatoes into kernels during this period of time. Once you're able to achieve the same size, you'll be able to master the first stage of your cutting techniques, Meg instructed as he looked at the Reverend Amy. Okay, Wang Yao said. Anna nodded obediently before pulling out a small Chinese cleaver from the box. She pressed her little hand against the round potato before carefully placing the cleaver over it. As soon as she applied some force, the potato slid away from her little hand and rolled into the nearby sink. Oh! Anna was stunned for a moment. She quickly got down from the stool and tiptoed to pick up the potato. She pressed it on the chopping board and continued to slice it. Meg stood to the side and watched for a while. He did not give her any advice, nor did he step forward to teach her. For a pure newbie, it would be better to give her some time to figure things out on her own. It would not make the process too boring. Moreover, the little girl's strength and hands-on ability were somewhat beyond his expectations. Ordinary human children would have a hard time holding a knife when they were 4 or 5 years old, but Anna seemed to be quite relaxed when holding a knife. Her actions of cutting vegetables were also quite decent, but she was still trying to figure out the correct method. After I learn how to cook, I'll cook for you. Anna turned around to look at Amy with a serious expression on her little face. Yay. Not only will father be able to cook for me in the future, but big sister Anna will also be able to cook for me. This is so blissful. Amy nodded with elation as she skipped into the kitchen. She looked at the potatoes and all kinds of small knives in front of Anna with curiosity in her eyes. Meg raised an eyebrow. It appeared that he was overthinking things. During this period of time, the friendship between the two of them had progressed by leaps and bounds, so they didn't care about this issue at all. Amy, do you want to learn how to cook with me? Cooking is very interesting. Anna looked at Amy, who was full of curiosity, and asked. Meg also looked at Amy when he heard this. Of course, he had also considered the idea of his daughter taking over his father's business. However, all this time, Amy was more interested in eating than cooking, so he didn't mention this matter much. It was best to let his child do what she liked. I feel that since you and father are both cooking, if I also cook, then no one will be responsible for eating. It's not right to waste food like this, so I've decided not to learn how to cook. I'll be responsible for eating. Amy shook her head firmly. Chapter 679. Sure enough, little foodies can always persuade people with strange reasons. Meg shook his head with a smile. He looked at the time and said, Okay, Anna's study is over for today. Go play with Amy. I'll call you for lunch later. Amy, Anna will be staying with us for a few days from today. Take her upstairs to familiarize herself with the environment, Meg said to Amy. Really? That's great. Amy's eyes lit up. She grabbed Anna's hand, who had just put down the knife, and walked out happily. Big sister Anna, I'll take you to the playground, and then I'll take you to my little bed to sleep. Meg looked at the two little girls disappearing at the door with a gentle smile. It was undoubtedly good news for him that the two little girls could get along well with each other. After dinner, Amy took Anna to the square to play, and the restaurant entered its busiest night. Mr. Mack, you asked for leave at noon without warning. I've been hungry for the whole afternoon. I can only order a bowl of Yangzhou fried rice to comfort myself tonight. That's right. It wasn't easy for me to apply for leave to come here this afternoon, but I was given the cold shoulder in the end. Boss Mag, your leave is a huge loss to us. I'm so glad that I didn't come at noon. Give me 2 steaks, one medium well, and the other medium well. Give me the medium well one first. The moment the customers entered the restaurant, they all began to complain about Meg's leave at noon. They all seemed to be very resentful. Meg, however, just laughed it off. He only asked for leave at noon. When he went a rodeo in a few days, who knew how many days he would be absent from work? He had to be mentally prepared. Customers came and went in the restaurant, and the long line gradually shortened. The restaurant's business was booming. An antiquated horse-drawn carriage stopped in front of the restaurant, and Ian raised a corner of the curtain. A smile appeared on his face as he looked at the extremely popular restaurant, and he said, I love restaurants like this. If there aren't any customers, then it's not even worth trying. Master, we might have to line up now. Do you need me to inform the restaurant to clear the area? A middle-aged man who looked like a butler stood beside the carriage and said softly, I'm not the king, so why do I have to clear the field for a meal? Brooker, do you have to change that habit of yours? Ian chuckled as he got off the carriage and walked towards the entrance of the restaurant. There were still some customers waiting in line. Yes. Brooker nodded before quickly opening the door of the restaurant. As soon as the door opened, a delicious aroma wafted out, causing Ian's eyes to light up. Compared to the crowded restaurant on the outside, it was surprisingly quiet inside. The seated guests were completely immersed in the delicious food in front of them. Occasionally, they could not help but exclaim in admiration. The customers in line also stood in silence, waiting for an empty seat to appear. Even if they were to speak, they would do their best to keep their voices down so that they wouldn't disturb the other customers. The elegant decor and the perfect amount of space between the tables created a very comfortable environment for dining. Ian looked around the restaurant, and he nodded slightly. Regardless of how the dishes tasted, this restaurant had already achieved a level of comfort for its customers. This was the foundation for a restaurant's popularity. Of course, the fact that elves and orcs were able to dine at the same table was a testament to just how magical the food in this restaurant was to be able to temporarily set aside their animosity toward one another. There are seats available over here. Please take a seat. Ian waited for a while, and several tables of customers finished their meals almost at the same time. Yabamiya led Ian and Brooker to a nearby table with a smile. Have a seat, Brooke. Ian gestured for Brooke to sit down with his hands clasped behind his back. I'll just stand beside you and wait on you, master. Brooker lowered his head slightly. I'm not at the stage where I need someone to wait on me while I eat, Ian replied with a smile. Brooker hesitated momentarily before taking a seat across from Ian. Half of his backside was on the chair, and he was in a state of readiness. Here's the menu. You can take a look at what you'd like to eat. Yabamiya handed over the menu to Ian with a smile. This white-bearded, elderly man appeared to be quite interesting, and it appeared that he was quite a lofty figure. Let me take a look. Ian opened the menu, and his eyes lit up at the sight of a series of intricate images on the menu. This menu was completely different from other menus that only had the names of the dishes and text introductions. The images on the menu were as if they were real, and the delectable dishes were so delicious that one couldn't help but want to try them. The names of the dishes, the images, and the prices were all very clear, and it was a lot more intuitive than those long paragraphs of text introductions. The fact that the customers are still lining up to dine in a restaurant of this scale indicates that the owner is quite capable. Ian swept his gaze over the prices of the dishes and nodded with approval. I'd like a black pepper steak and a savory tofu pudding. Ian closed the menu before handing it over to Brooker and said, Brooker, you can choose for yourself. Brooker flipped open the menu, and a hint of surprise appeared on his face at the sight of the prices. He hesitated momentarily before replying, I'd like a Yangzhou fried rice and a sweet tofu pudding. Yabamiya looked at Ian with a smile and asked, All right, sir. May I know how you'd like your steak? How would you like it done for an old man like me? Ian turned to Yabamiya with a smile. You look like you're in high spirits, so I'm sure your teeth are still in good shape. A medium-well steak will be slightly more tender, a medium-well steak will be slightly firmer, and a medium-well steak will be slightly more spicy. You can choose according to your preferences, Yabamiya replied with a smile. Then I'll have a medium-well steak. I like things that are a little chewy. Ian nodded. All right, please wait for a moment. Yabamiya nodded before quickly making his way to the kitchen. Jeffrey's rules are so fucked up. The half-dragon waitresses are far superior to normal waitresses, and those discriminatory rules should have been changed a long time ago, Ian thought to himself as he looked at Yabamiya's departing figure. But I don't think there's any wine in this world that's better than my wineries, right? Ian murmured to himself with furrowed brows. Your black pepper steak, medium well. Chapter 680. Ian's love for wine began when he was young. His father was a leather shoemaker, and after the war, he ran a small leather shoe workshop in Chaos City, specializing in custom-made leather shoes. He would buy a bottle of wine at the end of every month and place it on the windowsill. He would drink a small glass every night before going to bed. The young Ian was very curious about the purplish-red liquid in the glass. Finally, one day, when his father was out, he climbed onto the windowsill and carefully poured half a glass of wine into it. The wine cost dozens of copper coins per bottle, and it tasted a little sour and astringent. It was only brewed in a small, immature winery. However, at the time, Ian felt that it was the best wine he had ever tasted in his life. It was as if a door was slowly opening in front of him. The young Ian couldn't hold his liquor well and passed out after half a glass. Naturally, he was beaten up by his father when he came back. However, once this door was opened, it couldn't be closed again. From then on, he and his father played a game of hide-and-seek about wine for many years. It was not until he brought home the first bottle of wine, filled 2 glasses with wine for the first time openly, and sat opposite his father that the game of hide-and-seek truly ended. Therefore, many years later, many people asked him why he had thought of establishing buffet banks. His answer was that it was to be able to drink wine in a fair and square manner. Such a simple goal and wish supported him all the way to where he was now. Ever since he was no longer short of money, he took out a portion of the profits from the bank to build his winery. He had always believed that wine should be more than just that, so he established the Buffett Winery. An investment that was ridiculed by countless people in the beginning began to make profits 20 years later, and 30 years later, it became one of the most renowned wines on the Norland continent. The wine produced by Buffett Banks was known as liquid gold and was still very popular due to its exorbitant price. Even the royal family of the Roth Empire spent a huge sum of money to obtain a batch of premium wine from Buffett Banks every year. Ian was serious about drinking wine. Buffett Banks only produced 3 barrels of premium V-grade wine every year. 1 barrel was kept on the hill, and the other 2 barrels were sent to Ian. This was the best wine in the world. Even the king of the Roth Empire and the queen of the elves couldn't taste it. However, Ian narrowed his eyes as he looked at the steak in front of him and took a whiff of the aroma of beef and red wine wafting toward him. The aroma of the wine is so mellow and rich. What's more, this is the smell of the beef after it has been cooked. The fragrance of the wine has already spread a lot, but it can still reach this level. It's simply incredible. Ian had a look of disbelief on his face. During the construction of the winery, he would go to the wine cellar almost every day, guiding the Buffett Winery to its peak step by step. There was no one in the world who knew wine better than him. No, if that's all, it's not enough. Ian shook his head. He was still very confident in his winery's wine. This was a fine wine that had been brewed by countless top-notch winemakers, so there was no way that it would be inferior to the wine brewed by a restaurant owner. Sir, you can use a knife to cut the steak before eating, Yabamiya kindly reminded. All right. Ian nodded before picking up his knife and fork and gently slicing the beef. The tender beef was easily sliced open by the knife, and bright red wine and meat juices immediately seeped out. The aroma of the beef and red wine instantly erupted into the air. This aroma, how is this possible? Ian was completely rooted to the spot. The aroma of the wine had been a little bland in the past, but after the beef's aroma erupted, he was completely unable to deceive himself. What kind of wine is this? Which winery produced it? Ian immediately raised his head with an agitated expression as he turned to Yabamiya, who was just about to move on to the next table. What did you say, sir? Yabamiya was looking at Ian with a perplexed expression. He didn't know why this seemingly benevolent customer had suddenly flared up. All of the surrounding customers also turned to look at them. Isn't that old Master Ian? I didn't think that he would be eating at Amy's. Indeed. Ever since young Mistress Hill became the leader of the Buffett family, Old Master Ian rarely appears in public. But what's the situation now? Could it be that the food doesn't suit Old Master Ian's taste? Some of the customers recognized Ian, and this immediately caused a small commotion. Meg, who was cooking in the kitchen, also looked out of the restaurant when he heard the commotion. He couldn't help but look at Ian in surprise. He didn't think that Old Master Ian would also be here. However, after thinking about it, the steam engine issue was no small matter. Perhaps young Mistress Hill couldn't make up her mind, so she asked Old Master Buffett to come instead. This wasn't something that was difficult to understand. However, it seemed like Old Master Ian wasn't very satisfied with the food. I mean, what kind of wine was added to the steak? Which winery produced it? Ian also realized that he seemed to be a little too agitated, so he lowered his voice slightly. I don't know what kind of wine boss used, Yabamiya replied in a soft voice as he looked toward the kitchen for help. This is a home-brewed wine, and it didn't come from any winery. Do you have any objections? Or is the steak not to your taste? Meg came out of the kitchen with a smile as he looked at Ian. Home-brewed wine. Ian looked at Meg before looking around the restaurant again. He shook his head and said, This kind of wine can't be brewed in a place like this. I only use home-brewed wine for the steak. Mag was still smiling. This old man was indeed a connoisseur. The brewing of top-grade grape wine required strict control over every step, and the various equipment required would take up a lot of space. Her place was not even suitable to be used as a wine cellar. All right, I don't care who brewed this wine. Ian waved his hand and pointed at Meg with a hint of anger in his voice. But you're using such top-grade wine to cook. Doesn't your conscience hurt? I think that only top-grade ingredients can match the most delicious food. This wine goes perfectly with the black pepper steak. Meg shook his head with a smile. Perfectly? That's blasphemy to this wine. Do you know how rare such top-grade wine is? Even the best winemaker can't guarantee that he'll be able to brew it again, but you're using it to cook. Chapter 681. In Chaos City, not only was the Buffett Banks renowned throughout the world, the Buffett Winery was also renowned as the best winery on the entire Norland continent. This was the pride of Chaos City, and almost everyone knew about it. Wine wasn't invented by Ian Buffett, but it was renowned throughout the world because of the Buffett Winery. It was popular among the nobles, and the purple liquid swirling in the glass had also become a symbol of class. As such, Ian Buffett was known as the father of wine, which was a testament to everyone's approval of him. However, Ian was now roaring at Meg in a fit of rage because Meg had used this wine to cook. Where did this wine come from, Mr. Mac? Why is Old Master Ian so angry? I tasted it yesterday, and I knew that this wine was no ordinary wine. Old Master Ian's reaction today is quite similar to mine. Don't be a hindsight. Setting everything else aside, this incident is enough to show Mr. Mac's attitude toward food. He's using such a precious wine to cook steak, and he's making it so delicious. The price of 1,500 copper coins is far too generous. All of the customers were discussing quietly among themselves as they looked at Meg and Ian with interest. This legendary old master had always been known for his benevolence, and there weren't many situations that could make him fly into a rage. Beef, red wine, and black pepper are all top-notch ingredients, and only then can a perfect steak be made. Hence, I don't think there's any blasphemy involved. In my eyes, red wine is just as precious as beef and black pepper. Meg looked at Ian with a serious expression. He had thought that this old man was here to inspect him and discuss business, but he didn't think that he would destroy his restaurant as soon as the dishes were served. However, if it were his grandfather, his reaction would probably be similar if he saw such good red wine being used to make steak. People who loved wine couldn't accept wasting good wine. Of course, in Meg's heart, using red wine to cook steak wasn't a waste. Without such a high-quality wine, how could he make the most delicious steak? After all, cooking was his main occupation. Good wine has a soul. How can you compare it with beef and black pepper? Ian glared at Meg and waved his hand, saying, "Go, bring me a bottle of this wine. How much wine do you have left in your store? I'll take all of it. I'll charge you the price of the most expensive wine in the Buffett winery." The guests gasped when they heard this. The most expensive wine from the Buffett winery was sold for 200,000 copper coins per bottle, and this was the price of the winery itself. Generally, after a few rounds on the market, the price would soar to more than 300,000 copper coins. Moreover, there was no market for such wine. There's not a lot of wine, so it's only used to cook steaks. It's not for sale. Meg shook his head with a smile. Do you know how much a bottle of Buffett's most expensive wine costs? As long as one bottle of wine was sold, it would be equivalent to 200 steaks. Marinating 200 steaks would require more than one bottle of red wine. You'll be struck by lightning for wasting such a precious treasure. Ian was fuming with rage. He had thought that the owner of the store would have a good brain, but now it seemed that the owner was stubborn and couldn't even calculate such a small amount. The wine is not for sale. Please don't force it. If you want a drink, the restaurant provides beer, and you can order freely. If there's nothing else, I'll continue cooking. The other guests are still waiting. Meg nodded politely and turned to the kitchen. 200,000 per bottle, and Mr. Mac rejected it. I've only admired a few people in my life, and now Mr. Mac is one of them. He's the conscience of the gourmet world. Yeah, those who complain about the price of food, don't they have a conscience? That's 200,000 per bottle of wine, and Mr. Mac used it to cook steaks. Well, waiter, please give me a black pepper steak. All of the customers in the restaurant burst into an uproar at the sight of Mag's departing figure, and they were all struck by a sense of awe and veneration. You little bastard. You. Ian abruptly rose to his feet and prepared to chase after Meg. Master. Please calm down, master. It's not good for your health to be affected by your anger. Brooker hurriedly rose to his feet and held Ian back. It had been many years since he had seen his master so angry, and he consoled. This wine only has a slightly stronger aroma. There's no way that there's wine in this world that's better than the wine brewed by the Buffett winery. Besides, he doesn't look like he's capable of brewing good wine. Perhaps he's only used some tricks to enhance the aroma. After all, he's a chef. Ian looked at Brooker and thought to himself for a moment before sitting back down in his seat. Brewing wine is a delicate process. Without several decades of experience, it's impossible to brew good wine. He's a chef, not a winemaker. This wine smells good, but it doesn't necessarily taste good. Besides, I've never heard of using wine to cook, so it's definitely going to taste very mediocre. Ian hesitated momentarily at the sight of the delectable beef before him before picking up his fork and placing the piece of beef that he had just sliced into his mouth. He opened his mouth and took a light bite, and delicious gravy flowed out of the beef. The aroma of the black pepper was just right, and the delectable flavor danced on the tip of his tongue. A smile appeared on Ian's face. This flavor was simply unfathomable. He wasn't a picky eater, but the chef of the Moreton Manor had to be the best chef in Chaos City. In terms of deliciousness, he had never tasted beef as delicious as this one. After chewing carefully, Ian's expression abruptly changed. Aside from the delectable flavor of the beef, the sweet aroma of the wine was like a hidden treasure that had suddenly appeared before him. It was an irresistible attack of sweetness. It was not overshadowed by the deliciousness of the beef and black pepper, nor did it appear to be abrupt or unique. Instead, it blended perfectly into the beef, making the beef even more delicious and mellow, giving it a mellow texture. This was the most mellow and delicious wine that he had ever tasted. Even though it was only used as a spice, it still couldn't conceal its delectable flavor. In comparison, even the 3 barrels of V-grade wine produced by the Buffett Winery each year paled in comparison. There was nothing to nitpick about the delectable flavor of the steak. It had completely subverted all of Ian's expectations of beef. Every single cell in his body was cheering with joy, and he was completely in awe of this delectable flavor. He was even suddenly feeling a little relieved. Only the best wine could match such delectable beef. This smells so good. The taste of the various ingredients melted in his mouth, constantly attacking his taste buds. Even after swallowing, the fragrance still filled his mouth. What's to his stomach? How could there be such delicious food in this world? Is this really rice to be to him? Yangzhou fried rice was already quite cheap on the menu, but it still cost 600 copper coins per plate, which made him feel like the owner of this restaurant had set a steep price. However, Brooker felt like the price was far too high. All of the ingredients were extremely delicious, and even though they had all been sliced to the size of grains of rice, he could still taste all of the delicious flavors in his mouth, and it was truly incredible. He was Ian's butler, as well as the butler with the highest status in the Buffett family. His monthly salary was naturally quite high, and he even owned 2 shops under his name. He had already made up his mind that he was going to come back to eat this delicious Yangzhou fried rice again when he had some free time. If he could eat a bowl of this every day, then there would be nothing more he could ask for in life. Ding! Ian's knife and Brooker's spoon came into contact with the empty plate almost at the exact same time. The two of them looked at each other, and Brooker silently picked up the plate before licking the remaining 2 grains of rice. Useless. Ian pursed his lips as he looked at the small remaining pepper on the plate, and he silently picked it up and placed it into his mouth. A sheepish smile appeared on Brooker's face. He didn't think that Ian's actions were much more elegant than his own, but he could only keep such thoughts to himself. "Are you satisfied with your meal, master?" Brooker asked with a smile. However, he then felt like he had just asked a stupid question. He had never seen Ian eat everything on his plate so cleanly, not even leaving a single side dish behind. "I've never tasted such delicious beef before. It's just like the wine. It's the best of the best." Ian nodded as he put down his knife and fork. "Then what about this wine?" Brooker asked in a quiet voice with a slightly nervous expression. If Meg's wine could compare with the Buffett Winery's wine, then that was definitely not good news. Brooker's voice wasn't very loud, but all of the customers sitting beside him were listening intently. Most of the customers present were extremely wealthy, but none of them were as knowledgeable as Ian when it came to wine, so his evaluation was naturally the most authoritative. Ian contemplated momentarily before nodding. "I've only tasted the wine that was added to the beef, but judging from its aroma and texture after heating, the quality of this wine is not inferior to the A-grade wine brewed by the Buffett Winery. In fact, it may even taste better." A-grade wine is the highest-rated wine sold by the Buffett Winery, and each bottle costs at least 200,000 copper coins. My God, that's way too extravagant. He's cooking a steak with an A-grade wine. As expected of Mr. Mac, Mr. Mac. I thought that beer was already the pinnacle of Mr. Mac's winemaking, but it looks like I still underestimated him. He's driving all of the other industries to death. Ian didn't bother to lower his voice as he spoke, and his words instantly created a stir in the restaurant. All of the customers were looking at the steak on their plates with completely different expressions. Black pepper, A-grade wine, and the meat of a 4th-tier magic beast, ironhide bull. This was no longer just an ordinary steak. This was an extremely expensive steak. After taking a single bite, The aroma of the steak was no longer that of gold coins. Instead, it was that of dragon coins. Of course, money was far more important than the taste. However, knowing that this seemingly ordinary piece of steak was made with such top-notch ingredients, he felt a lot more comfortable after taking a bite. It even had the effect of being delicious. He does have a weird temper, but he really is a fair old man. Meg nodded slightly upon hearing Ian's words. The fact that he was able to give such a high evaluation of the steak was a testament to his expertise in wine. Chapter 683. What kind of brain is this tofu pudding? Could it be the brain of some kind of magic beast? Ian looked at the tofu pudding before him. The white tofu pudding was placed in a small bowl, with chopped pickled vegetables and other side dishes placed on top of it. A spoonful of orange sauce had been poured over the tofu pudding, and the aroma of the sauce and side dishes combined with the aroma of beans wafted toward Ian. He had just finished his steak, and the refreshing aroma of beans was a pleasant surprise to him. The white tofu pudding was completely different from the brain that he had envisioned, and he didn't feel nauseous in the slightest. It looks very appetizing, and the aroma is very refreshing as well. It should taste quite good. Ian nodded before looking at the tofu pudding in front of Brooke with a smile, and said, "Brooke, you're not getting any younger, so you should cut down on sweets. It's not good for your health." "Master, this is my only hobby. If I can't even eat sweets, I'll feel like something is missing from my life." Brooke smiled as he looked at the sweet tofu pudding in front of him with an elated expression. The tofu pudding was square and white, and there was a layer of reddish golden syrup on top of it. It looked like a piece of pure white jade wrapped in amber. When he picked up the bowl, the tofu pudding wobbled a little. It looked very springy, and there was even steam rising from the syrup. The aroma of the heated syrup mingled with the aroma of beans, and he could already taste the sweetness in his mouth even before he had eaten it. For a dessert lover like him, this was simply too alluring. The two of them picked up their spoons at almost the exact same moment before placing a spoonful of tofu pudding into their mouths. This flavor. Brooke's eyes immediately widened. The tofu pudding and the syrup melted in his mouth, and in contrast with the usual sticky syrup, this reddish golden syrup was sweet but not greasy, and it didn't overpower the tofu pudding's natural aroma in the slightest. He swallowed the tofu pudding down his throat, and the faint aroma of beans lingered in his mouth. Brooke loved sweets, and he had eaten countless types of desserts. He would always carry a bag of sweets in his pocket, and it had already become a habit for him to have one every now and then. When she first started working for Ian, she would often be so busy that she didn't have time to eat. When she was hungry, she would eat a candy. Gradually, it became a habit. If she didn't eat some candy every day, she would feel uncomfortable the whole day. Even though he had tried all kinds of desserts, he still fell in love with the sweet tofu pudding after tasting it. He felt as if he had suddenly fallen into a delicious trap, surrounded by countless sweet syrups. He plunged in, wantonly rolling and tasting inside, enjoying the smoothness and sweetness of this moment alone. What a delightful taste! Ian looked at the empty spoon in front of him with elation on his face. The white and tender tofu pudding was wrapped in an orange-red sauce, and there was a bit of chopped pickled mustard on top. As soon as he put it into his mouth, it melted without even chewing. The fragrant and sweet tofu pudding, savory pickled mustard, and sauce blended together perfectly. All kinds of flavors wreaked havoc in his mouth, and after swallowing, his mouth was filled with a faint bean flavor that was filled with a refreshing feeling. Eating this savory tofu pudding after finishing the steak was an indescribable feeling. The white porcelain spoons clinked against the sides of the bowls, and one spoonful of tofu pudding after another was shoveled into their mouths. Sweet tofu pudding is the king of all desserts. I've never tasted anything as delicious as this. This is an irresistible delicacy. Brooker licked the syrups in his bowl clean before putting it down with an expression of awe and satisfaction on his face. It was as if his life had been elevated. Ian put down his bowl and shook his head as he looked at Brooker. You should try the savory tofu pudding before you say that. Treating tofu pudding as a dessert is an insult to tofu pudding. Tofu pudding should be a delicious snack, not a sweet dessert. Master, I respect you very much, but desserts are my religion. Sweet tofu pudding has completely replaced desserts in my heart, so please don't insult it. Brooker looked at Ian with a serious expression and said, also, tofu pudding already has a slightly sweet flavor, and adding the syrups in it maximizes that flavor. I think this is the correct way to make tofu pudding delicious. Salty tofu pudding is the only thing that's going to ruin its flavor. As your boss, I have to correct your erroneous beliefs. Tofu pudding should be eaten salty. Ian also wore a serious expression. Master, you may be my boss, but you can't change my mind about sweet tofu pudding. I'm willing to live and die with sweet tofu pudding. Brooker wore a determined expression. Ian stared at Brooker for a long while before placing his hand on the table. Brooker immediately rose to his feet, but he still had no intention of backing down. Then I'll also stand by my decision. Ian harumphed coldly before rising to his feet and making his way toward the kitchen. I respect your decision. Brooker heaved a sigh of relief, and he suddenly felt as if his legs were about to give out from under him. He had worked for Ian for several decades, and this was the first time he had ever opposed him. Who would have thought that it would be over a bowl of tofu pudding? Boss. Mag, right? The steak and savory tofu pudding are very delicious, but I still want to discuss something with you. Can you sell me a bottle of your wine? I only want one bottle, and I'll sell it to you at the same price as before. Ian made his way to the entrance of the kitchen and turned to Meg as he spoke. I'll sell it. I'll sell it. Meg was roaring internally, but he still shook his head with a smile as he said, My apologies, but wine is not for sale. I'll add another 100,000. Ian looked into Meg's eyes. I'm not selling. Meg shook his head with a smile. He felt as if his heart were bleeding. That was 300,000 copper coins he was talking about. The cost of buying a bottle of wine from the system was only a few hundred copper coins, yet the system was killing off such a lucrative business opportunity. What a massive waste of resources. System, why don't we set the winemaking method as the reward for our next mission? I'll be able to do it myself, so I don't want to tire you out every day. Meg was grinning internally. Mission rewards are random, but as long as the host works hard to complete the mission, there's still hope that you'll be rewarded with the winemaking method, the system replied. Do you think I'm an idiot? If I give you the winemaking method, then I'll have built my winery for nothing. A line of text quickly flashed past Meg's attention. Interesting. Mr. Mack, you're welcome to visit my winery next time. I'll treat you to some of my wine. A smile reappeared on Ian's face as he looked at Meg. You're far too kind. If the opportunity arises, I'll be sure to visit you. Meg also nodded with a smile. He wanted to discuss with the old man whether they should hold a lunch auction together. On Earth, Old Man Buffett's lunches were all auctioned off for hundreds of thousands of dollars each time. Even though this Old Man Buffett didn't invest in the stock market, he was just as legendary as Old Man Buffett on Earth. If news of this were to spread, the stock market would most likely explode. Only that old man could come up with such a way of earning money when someone else was treating him to a meal, and he still had to give him money. Chapter 684. Master, are you worried that Mr. Mack's wine will affect the winery? Brooker asked with a concerned expression. Ever since they had gotten into the horse-drawn carriage, Ian hadn't said a single word. Competition exists in all industries, and it's always beneficial to the development of an industry. If his wine really does pose a threat to our winery, then those guys who keep telling me that they've already done their best will know what to do instead of sleeping on women's bellies. Ian shook his head with a hint of mockery in his eyes. Then, Brooker was rather perplexed. I'm thinking about whether we should make him the manager of the winery so that he can improve the quality of our wine. An eager smile appeared on Ian's face. A concerned look appeared on Brooker's face as he said, But master, all of the winemakers in the winery are extremely experienced. If we make Mr. Mack the manager, they'll most likely be disgruntled. It's too risky. Ian smiled and said, If they're not as good as him, then they can keep it to themselves. I've always looked at the people I employ based on their abilities. Otherwise, the winery wouldn't have been able to grow to such a scale. All of my old friends who started this business with me back in the day were only able to manage one shop at most. But young Mistress Hill is in charge of the winery now, so, Brooker said in a quiet voice. There's no rush. Young Mistress Hill has been very busy recently. However, if she succeeds, then I'll go to that guy again. And he won't be able to turn me down, Ian replied with a smile. Father, why didn't you bring Mother with you? It's not very appropriate for the two of us to sneak out for supper. Vivian jumped down from the horse-drawn carriage first and looked at Michael with a smile, completely devoid of any shame. Michael also jumped down from the horse-drawn carriage with a smile and said, I told your mother about this, and she said that she doesn't want to eat supper as she's afraid of gaining weight. She also doesn't want to eat spicy food as she's afraid that something will grow on her face, so only the two of us came. Vivian heaved a faint sigh and said, That's a real pity. Mother missed out on the delicious spicy grilled fish just like that. Next time, you have to tell her that she can eat a bowl of tofu pudding after the spicy grilled fish, and she'll be able to recover all of her lost weight. On top of that, her skin will become even fairer and more supple. There's such a thing? I'll bring one back for your mother. She'll love it. Michael's eyes lit up. Vivian looked at Michael with a smile and said, Father, you're out for a meal with your precious daughter, but you're only thinking about your wife. You're doing me a lot of harm. Okay. Order whatever you want to eat today. If you can't finish it, take it home and continue eating. Michael smiled helplessly. If you say so, then I won't hold back. Vivian's eyes lit up as she strode toward the restaurant. It was almost 9 o'clock. The restaurant was less crowded, and there were some empty seats. Vivian opened the door and entered, followed by Michael. All of the customers in the restaurant faltered slightly at the sight of Michael before hurriedly standing up to greet him. None of them had thought that the city lord would suddenly appear here. There's no need to greet me. I'm only here to eat. Michael waved his hand with a smile and gestured for everyone to take a seat. Could it be that young Mistress Vivian is the city lord's daughter? Yabamiya looked at Vivian with a surprised expression as she sat down across from Michael. Vivian raised her hand and turned to Yabamiya with an excited expression as she said, Here's a large, insanely spicy grilled fish. Father, we should be able to finish it, right? Vivian turned to Michael. This insanely spicy grilled fish. Michael mused to himself. He hadn't tried insanely spicy grilled fish before, but judging from the super spicy grilled fish last time, it most likely wasn't something that he could handle. However, at the sight of Vivian's excited expression, he hesitated momentarily before nodding as he said, Sure, we can take it home if we can't finish it. Has the black pepper steak been released yet? Michael asked with a smile as he turned to Yabamiya, who had already arrived at the table. Yabamiya nodded with a smile and replied, That's right, it was released today. Is that the steak from last night? Vivian's interest was also immediately piqued. That's right. Yabamiya nodded after a brief moment of contemplation. Vivian clapped her hands together and said, Then I'll also have a black pepper steak. I was almost drooling at the sight of it last night. I have to try it today. Michael turned to Vivian with a perplexed expression and asked, Didn't you already order a large, insanely spicy grilled fish? That won't stop me from eating my steak. I skipped dinner just for this meal, Vivian replied with a sly smile. Little girl. A doting smile appeared on Michael's face as he turned to Yabamiya and said, Let's do as she says. 2 black pepper steaks and 1 large, insanely spicy grilled fish. All right, please wait a moment. Yabamiya nodded with a smile, but there was a hint of envy in her eyes. She really was blessed to have a father who doted on her so much. Hello, big sister Vivian, Uncle City Lord. Amy greeted with a smile as she held Ugly Duckling in one hand and Anna's hand in the other. Amy, who's this? Vivian turned to Anna with a curious expression. This little elven girl appeared to be very gentle and quiet, and she was also very adorable and intricate. She's big sister Anna, Amy introduced. Mag looked at Vivian, who was chatting with Amy and Anna, and then his gaze fell on Michael. This city lord was very straightforward and easygoing, and he was quite fond of him. However, he didn't know if he was here to have supper with his daughter, or if he was here for the steam engine. The 2 black pepper steaks were served first. Oh, this is so delicious. Vivian cut off a piece of beef and put it into her mouth, upon which a blissful smile appeared on her face. It seems to be even more delicious than yesterday. As expected, it's even better in Mr. Mac's own restaurant. Beat deserved to lose. Michael couldn't help but praise the dish after taking a bite. After finishing the beef, a massive spicy grilled fish was placed in front of the 2 of them, and it took up almost the entire table. Michael reflexively scooted back half a meter in his chair in the face of the overwhelming spiciness. Just the spiciness alone was enough to make him want to cry. This was no ordinary spiciness. It was insanely spicy. It smells so good. Vivian rushed forward with an excited expression and fanned herself with her hands before nodding with satisfaction. She picked up a piece of fish with her chopsticks and dipped it into the broth before putting it into her mouth. She chewed and swallowed with an elated expression, then immediately picked up another piece of fish and put it into her mouth. She couldn't stop herself at all. It's not spicy. Chapter 685. Yes. Michael's face immediately became flushed, and it was as if flames were about to erupt from his eyes. He held his tongue for a long while before finally swallowing, and immediately turned to Yabamiya as he said, "Get me a glass of beer with ice." "All right." Yabamiya quickly strode toward the kitchen. Not everyone could stomach the insanely spicy level. "Father, are you all right?" Vivian asked as she ate her grilled fish with a sly smile on her face as she turned to Michael. Michael accepted the glass of beer that Yabamiya handed to him and downed most of the glass in one go. Only then did he feel the scorching sensation in his throat disappear, and his expression eased slightly as he heaved a sigh of relief. He looked at Vivian with a wry expression and said, "You're such a scammer. How can you possibly stomach this insanely spicy level?" Vivian took a large bite of the fish before turning to Michael with a confused expression. "Why can't I eat anymore? I think the insanely spicy level is the most delicious level of spicy grilled fish. Ever since I've tasted the insanely spicy level, I feel like all other levels of spiciness are too mediocre, and they're completely tasteless." "All right, then eat some more. Be careful of the fish bones." Michael shook his head in a resigned manner before downing the entire glass of beer in one go. He then gestured for Yabamiya to get him another glass. He couldn't stomach this insanely spicy grilled fish, but he was more than happy to have another glass of this delicious cold beer. It was the closing time at 9 a.m. Mag waited for 2 minutes for the customers to finish the food on the table before he started to clear the place. Michael turned to Meg with a smile and said, "Mr. Mac, I heard from Dykus that you have a business deal that you'd like to make with the City Lord's castle. Would it be all right for me to come and take a look?" A smile appeared on Mag's face as he replied, "The City Lord has come in person, so there's no reason for me to turn you down. If you're not in a hurry to go home, young Mistress Vivian, you can enjoy your grilled fish here and play with Amy and Anna for a while. Take your time. I still have half a fish to eat," Vivian said without raising her head. She flipped the half-eaten fish over and continued to eat. "You can go back today and come back tomorrow morning to tidy up." Meg turned to look at Yabamiya and Sally. He then said a few words to Amy before leading Michael to the room next to the restaurant. A few lights illuminated the empty room, and the small train in the corner was quite eye-catching. Michael circled the steam locomotive and asked curiously, "This is a steam locomotive? Can you really run with such a steel-like appearance?" Meg opened the lid of the boiler. As he added coal, he said, "This steam locomotive converts the heat energy from burning coal into a controllable mechanical energy. Then, by pushing the connecting rod back and forth, it drives the small train forward. It doesn't need any external traction and can run on its own. It can also drive many carriages to move. Only coal is needed." Michael walked forward and bent down to pick up a piece of coal. He crushed it into black powder in his hand, confirming that it was indeed coal. Currently, the steam engine can only use coal, but if there are more efficient alternatives in the future, it might be able to be used. Meg nodded. He didn't say anything definite. After all, This was a magical world, and there might be more efficient and cheaper energy sources. Michael looked at the steam locomotive with interest. Can I try it? Of course, Mr. Castellan. Please get on. Meg nodded with a smile. He ignited the boiler, and white steam spewed out from the chimney. He climbed onto the locomotive, and when the pressure on the barometer reached the threshold, he pushed the rod, and the steam engine began to move forward. Michael looked down at the locomotive rolling forward on the tracks, and his eyes lit up. If the feedback that the Hater team had given him about the steam engine was as vague as an attic in the sky, then sitting on the steam locomotive, he could truly feel the changes brought about by the steam engine. There was no need for animal power, just cheap coal, and this big guy made of steel with white steam coming out of it could carry people forward. The steam locomotive circled around the room and stopped. Michael sat on the locomotive for a while before getting off. He looked at Meg and said, "Mr. Mack, how is the endurance of your steam locomotive? How much weight can it carry at one time?" This is a miniaturized version of the steam locomotive. It is mainly used for demonstration and trial runs. If it is to be put into actual operation, the whole thing needs to be enlarged to increase the horsepower of the steam engine and increase the load capacity. A steam locomotive can carry more than 100 tons. The specific data can only be determined after the actual steam locomotive is built. The endurance depends on the amount of coal. As long as there is enough coal, the train can reach any place where the tracks are laid. Meg looked at Michael and said with a serious expression. Michael reached out and gently knocked on the train. After a moment of silence, he looked at Meg and said with a smile, "Make an appointment with the Hill. Let's talk about cooperation." Okay. A smile also appeared on Meg's face. The City Lord's castle was simpler than he thought. After the City Lord's castle agreed, Meg already had the right to choose the third-party partner. The blue suede was still brightly lit at this time. Mars quickly walked into the room. He looked at Gloria, who was holding a piece of silk and thinking about something, and said, "Young mistress, all 30 sets of gowns have been pre-ordered." Chapter 686. In the northern part of the city, in a secluded courtyard, there were 2 sets of dim lights in a room. One of the black-robed men looked at Seuss with a grave expression and said in a hushed voice, "Leader, we didn't receive any information about Snare and the others, nor were we able to find any leads. However, judging from what we found after returning to our stronghold, we've left behind many of our belongings and weapons, so Snare and the others most likely didn't leave Chaos City of their own accord. They must have encountered some mishap while searching for Alex and were wiped out," another black-robed man said with a grim expression. "Could it be that they found Alex?" One of the black-robed men exclaimed before immediately covering his mouth with a hint of horror in his eyes. The atmosphere in the room instantly plunged to the freezing point. All of the black-robed men were silent, and they could see the horror in each other's eyes. Even though they had been targeting Alex for the past few years, the first thing they were struck by was not surprise, but horror instead. That legendary man had left behind an indelible record, and at the same time, he had left a deep shadow in the hearts of all of his opponents. There's no way that it was Alex. He's already crippled, so there's no way that he could wipe out Narson's entire team on his own. Seuss shook his head with certainty. His lips curled into a cold smile as he said, "However, no matter who it is, they must pay the price for killing a small team of our Black Eagles. Blood for blood, a tooth for a tooth." All of the black-robed men's expressions eased slightly upon hearing that, and confidence returned to their faces. Even though there's no way that Alex was the one who killed them, this doesn't necessarily mean that he has nothing to do with this. I'm going to deploy all of the Black Falcons to Chaos City and conduct a thorough search to track down Narson and the others, as well as to capture Alex. Seuss clenched his fists with a cold smile and said, "I have a feeling that he's in Chaos City right now. It's not in his nature to go deep into the mountains." "Yes," all of the black-robed men replied in unison. After bidding farewell to the City Lord and his daughter, Meg took Amy and Anna upstairs. He bribed Barbara with a black pepper steak and asked her to give Anna a bath. After putting on a pretty pink nightgown, the two of them lay down on a little bed. Meow, Ugly Duckling was crying out from under the bed, and it was clinging to the foot of the bed as it poked its head out. Amy poked her head out from under the bed and said, "Ugly duckling, I already have big sister Anna. I don't want you anymore. You can sleep on the floor from now on." Meow. Ugly duckling's ears immediately drooped, and it withdrew its front paws from the foot of the bed as tears welled up in its eyes. Ugly, ugly duckling. Amy of the bed of her of course, and to her of the world, of the black falcons of the bed of chaos of the world of the world. Of the black of black black to the bed of black of the black bed to it. Of Amy to ugly duckling immediately jumped up in excitement and looked up at Amy with an expectant expression. Seeing as big sister Anna has already agreed, then I'll reluctantly agree to let you sleep on the bed, but you have to be good. Amy nodded after a brief moment of contemplation. She lay down on the bed, picked up ugly duckling, and placed it between the two of them. Meow. Ugly duckling found a comfortable position between the two of them before closing its eyes and falling asleep. Good boy. Anna stroked ugly duckling's fur gently with a smile on her face. But it's getting fatter and fatter. I feel like this bed is going to collapse under its weight soon. Amy sighed as she pinched ugly duckling's face. It's even cuter when it's chubby. Look how fun it is to pinch it like this. It's like it's made out of water. Anna pinched ugly duckling's face with both hands and gently pinched it into a round pancake, then a square. Wow, I didn't know you could do that. Amy's eyes lit up, and she was instantly intrigued. She reached out to pinch ugly duckling's face to the sides, and it immediately changed its appearance, causing the two little fellows to burst into laughter. How pitiful! Meg, who had just come out of the shower, couldn't help but shake his head with a smile upon seeing this scene. Other people's cats were all masters, but here, ugly duckling's status in the family was automatically reduced by one no matter who it was. The two little fellows had a lot of fun, and Amy turned to Meg and said coquettishly, "Father, can you tell us a bedtime story?" Anna also turned to Meg upon hearing that, and her eyes lit up with anticipation. In the past, Grandpa would tell her a bedtime story every night to coax her to sleep. All right, then let's tell you a story about Snow White today. Meg sat down on the bed with a stool. Is Snow White made of ice cream? Amy asked, raising her little hand. No, Snow White is called Snow White because her skin is as white as snow. Meg shook his head with a smile. His daughter's brain was really wired like no one else's. I see. What a pity. Amy nodded regretfully. Although he didn't know what Amy felt regretful about, Meg still began to tell the story of Snow White in a gentle and low voice. In the harsh winter, the snow was like goose feathers dancing in the sky. The queen sat by the window, looking at the white snow, and made a wish. Snow White's tragic life began with this beautiful wish. Because of her beauty, she was envied by the new queen, and was kidnapped into the forest. She met the 7 dwarves, but still couldn't escape from the queen's clutches. First, she was almost strangled to death, and then she was almost killed by a poisonous comb. Amy and Anna were completely immersed in Meg's story. They were worried about Snow White's life and death, and their anger toward the vicious queen fluctuated along with the story. However, when he reached the part where Snow White ate a poisonous apple and died as if she was in a deep sleep, Meg stopped. As a father, he really couldn't tell them the original story. A necrophiliac prince fell in love with Snow White's corpse, spent money to buy her corpse, and ended up with her in the end. This was not in line with his worldview. Father, what happened after that? Did Snow White really die? Amy looked at Meg sadly. Anna's eyes were also filled with tears. This Snow White was as pitiful as she was. Chapter 687. A gratified smile appeared on Meg's face at the sight of the two little girls falling asleep with smiles on their faces. Self-reliance was the right way to start a fairy tale. Stories like abandoning one's brain and relying on one's Prince Charming weren't suitable for little girls at all. He tiptoed back onto his bed and rested as he thought back to everything that had happened today. The City Lord's castle had more or less made a decision, But Buffett still had to wait for the Hill's opinion. Whether the three parties would be able to enter into a substantive discussion or not would still be up to the Hill to decide. After that, Meg looked at the 0.5 strength point pouch in his body. This was the reward that the system had given him for completing the system mission today. Even though it wasn't much, it was undoubtedly a timely addition to Meg's current situation. The journey to Rodu was going to be fraught with dangers, and the more powerful he was, the greater his chances of survival would be. Meg lay on his bed for a long while before looking at the clock. It was already midnight, and only then did he silently crawl out of his bed and make his way to the balcony. System, activate the soundproofing effects of the room, then activate the 0.5 strength point, Meg said internally as he made his way to the balcony. The memory of being struck by lightning last time was still fresh in his mind, and no one wanted to experience something like that again. However, he had to make the lightning strike even more ferociously, and this feeling of exasperation made him feel a little resigned. The soundproofing effects of the restaurant have been fully activated. Prepare to be struck by lightning. Please close your eyes. The system's voice sounded with a hint of glee and schadenfreude in its voice. Meg pursed his lips and refrained from saying anything. He stood at the center of the balcony and waited for the lightning to strike. There was probably nothing more torturous in this world than waiting to be struck by lightning. Hence, when a bolt of lightning as thick as a water bucket fell from the sky and landed on Meg, he even felt a sense of release as a clap of thunder exploded beside his ears. Phew! After an indeterminate period of time, Meg heaved a long sigh of relief and stretched his completely stiff body. Lightning swam over the surface of his body, making crackling sounds as if he had just been fished out of a thunderstorm. Fortunately, I took off all my clothes. Otherwise, another set would have been ruined. Meg lowered his head and looked at his charred body. Even his shorts had turned into ashes when he moved slightly. A gust of autumn wind blew, causing him to shiver. He quickly put on a bathrobe and went downstairs. While taking a shower, Meg felt the changes in his body after the lightning strike. Meg felt that even if he were to face an ironhide bull now, he would be able to beat it to the ground with a single punch. This was not an arrogant thought, but a judgment of the physical fitness of a level 4 knight. If a normal 4th tier knight were to face off against an ironhide bull, perhaps they would be able to capture it with their exceptional swordsmanship and other abilities. However, if this knight specialized in body refinement, then his powerful physical constitution would allow him to clash head-on with the ironhide bull. Alex was someone who could fight against a giant dragon back then, so his physical fitness was naturally incomparably strong. Before I go to Rodu, I have to master my swordsmanship to the pinnacle of the 4th tier. Meg slowly clenched his fists as he made up his mind. Within a lavish and intricate room in the Moritan manor, a warm light illuminated a corner of the room. Hill was sitting by the window, holding a crystal glass that was half filled with wine. His brows were furrowed as he pondered something. The room was silent for a long while. Hill looked at the wine glass in his hand before suddenly raising it and downing it in one gulp. It was as if he had made up his mind, and a smile appeared on his face as he said, "In the past, I've always prioritized stability in all of my investments. However, perhaps I should take a gamble this time. If I succeed, then the Buffett family will become one of the most powerful families on the Norland continent. Aside from the bank and winery, the Buffett family will also have a steam locomotive that is just as renowned as the Buffett family. That will be an honor for me. Mr. Meg, I hope you don't disappoint me." Hill put down his wine glass and snuffed out the light. In a hotel room in the northern part of the city, Snare, who had disguised himself as a burly man with a full beard, was carefully examining a map under the light. There were already a few places on the map that had been circled with red lines, making it appear rather messy. It's not easy to find someone in Chaos City who's intentionally hiding themselves, and there's no one I can trust. Hopefully, I'll be lucky this time and find the young mistress and Master Alex as soon as possible. Snare heaved a faint sigh as he sat at the table. He quickly wrote a letter before placing it into a small bamboo tube. After that, he silently opened the window and blew a thin whistle. A white hummingbird that was only around the size of 2 fingers flew into his hand. He tied the small bamboo tube to the hummingbird's leg and tossed it out the window before disappearing into the night sky in the blink of an eye. In the second prince's manor in Rodu. Your Highness, this is a letter from Ambassador Carols. The butler quickly strode into the study with a letter in his hand. He made his way over to the desk in a respectful manner before presenting the letter to Joshua. Carols? Josh's brows furrowed as the letter in his hand transformed into a ball of dark green light. He accepted the letter from the butler and began to read it. Meg. Is this a coincidence, or is there a connection between them? Josh's brows furrowed even more tightly after reading half of the letter. He continued to read on before shaking his head again. No, Alex isn't someone who can cook well. Even if he's a cripple now, there's no way he'd become a chef. He's a proud man, and even if he were to die, there's no way he'd lower his head to anyone or cook for anyone. There's no way he'd become a good chef. The butler stood off to the side in silence, not daring to utter a single sound. After reading Carol's letter, Josh fell silent for a moment before picking up a pen and paper to write a reply. Carol's had been an ambassador in Chaos City for over 10 years, and that was more than enough for him to receive a decent official title upon his return to Rodu. All he had to do was use his connections to secure him a position of authority, and that wasn't a difficult task for him. As for Carol's request for the best chef in Chaos City to cook for the king on his birthday, Josh was quite intrigued by it. He had been quite troubled recently about what kind of birthday present the king would like. There were countless precious treasures in the royal palace, and the king couldn't afford a beautiful woman. If this chef really was as good as Carol's claimed, then it would be worth a try. Seuss is in a difficult situation in Chaos City, so I'll have Carol's use his connections in Chaos City one last time before he leaves. Josh put down his pen and folded the letter before handing it to the butler beside him. Mr. Mag, I wonder if you've thought it through? Chapter 688. Meg opened the door and was greeted by the sight of a slightly portly middle-aged butler standing at the entrance of the restaurant. A perplexed look appeared on his face as he asked, "Who are you?" The man smiled and replied, "I am Master Carol's butler, Holton. I'm here on behalf of Master Carol's to ask if you've decided to travel to Rodu with him in 14 days to cook for His Majesty's birthday banquet." Meg nodded with a slightly apologetic expression as he said, "I see. Please tell Master Carol's that I haven't discussed this matter with my child yet, so I'll have to wait a few more days before I can give him a reply. Master Carol's has said that if you're willing to travel to Rodu with him, you can also travel with him. You'll be taking flying magic beasts to Rodu, and it'll only take you a day to get there," Holton said as he looked at Meg. Meg nodded and replied, "I'll consider it. Thank you for your kind offer, Master Carol's." Before the matter of the steam engine was settled, he couldn't give Carol's an accurate answer. Otherwise, it would be quite boring if he wasn't recognized in Rodu, only to be locked up as a royal chef in the royal palace. That wouldn't be in line with Meg's plans. "All right, I'll relay Mr. Mag's message to my master. However, going to Rodu is an extremely rare opportunity, so I hope you'll consider it carefully." Hutun nodded and didn't say anything else as he rode away on his horse. Rewards come with risks. I have to make this trip to Rodu. Meg looked on at Holton's departing figure with a grim expression. After breakfast, Amy went to class, while Anna continued to practice her knife skills with Meg in the kitchen. Her perseverance and determination came as quite a surprise to Meg. Of course, he was also quite pleased to see her like this. Which master wouldn't want their disciples to be more hardworking? Even though Anna was quite young, she was far more hardworking than the average person. After lunch, Meg was just about to close the restaurant for a rest when Dykus and Hill appeared at the entrance of the restaurant. "Mr. Meg, would you be free for a chat?" Hill asked with a smile at the sight of the slightly surprised Meg. Meg was indeed a little surprised, but he quickly recovered. Hill certainly wasn't going to follow his plan, so he nodded with a smile and said, "Ms. Hill and Master Dykus are both here, so of course I'm free. Please come in." Sally and Barbara had taken Anna to help Yabamiya, so there was no one else in the restaurant. Meg came out with 2 glasses of water and placed them in front of Hill and Dicus before taking a seat as well. Hill took a sip of water before smiling at Meg and said, "Please don't misunderstand, Mr. Meg. I went to the City Lord's castle this morning to confirm whether the City Lord's castle is willing to participate in your plan. However, it seems like my worries were unfounded. The City Lord is very supportive of your plan, so he asked Master Dicus to come with me to discuss the details of the cooperation with you. This is no small matter, so it's only right that Ms. Hill is being cautious." Meg nodded with a smile. He was already quite surprised that Hill was willing to cooperate with him in just one night. After all, steam engines and trains were completely new to this world. They hadn't been tested in the market, so the risks were uncontrollable, and the investment was extremely high. Dicus put a thick file on the table and smiled at Meg as he said, "The City Lord is very appreciative of Mr. Meg's creativity and is willing to cooperate fully with Mr. Meg's production and marketing plan. Since all three parties have made their intentions clear, let's not beat around the bush and get straight to the point." Meg looked at the two of them with a serious expression and said, "I can provide all the technology and processes for steam engines and steam locomotives, and I will continue to do research in this area and upgrade the steam engines. My request is that I get 10% of the profits from the entire system." Hill thought for a while before looking at Meg and said, "Since Mr. Meg is so open, I won't play the game of beating around the bush. Buffett Banks can provide all the funds and resources of the Norland continent for this plan, but my request is that you get the exclusive right to operate the steam locomotives, and no less than 60% of the profits from the entire system. The development and operation of the steam engines will be separated from this plan. I hope it will be a bilateral cooperation between Buffett Banks and Mr. Meg. Mr. Meg will get 20% of the profits related to this plan. He is indeed an impressive businessman." Meg couldn't help but praise him in his heart, but his expression remained calm. The characteristics of the steam locomotives required a force like Chaos City's involvement to promote them faster, but the promotion and development of the steam engines was purely a commercial activity. Although Hill gave Meg 10% of the profits, he also got full autonomy. The City Lord's castle can accept 30% of the profits from the steam locomotives, and the City Lord's castle will let the Bureau of Machinery fully cooperate with the manufacturing and provide all kinds of talents. They will also be responsible for building relationships with the various races so that the steam locomotives can be promoted smoothly. However, apart from 30% of the profits, the City Lord's castle has another request. Once we enter an emergency period, Chaos City will have the right to temporarily take over the railway, and the other two parties will have to give their full support." Dicus looked at the two of them and continued, "As for the steam engines, I don't have the right to make a decision. I have to report this to the City Lord first before I can give a reply. During an emergency period, the Buffett family will stand by Chaos City unconditionally and will definitely cooperate with the City Lord's castle." Hill nodded. He had no objections. Meg nodded slightly. Michael should have given Dicus a region, and Hill's conditions were acceptable to the City Lord's castle. He smiled and said, "In this case, the three parties have reached a basic agreement regarding the steam locomotives. We can discuss the steam engines later. We can finalize the steam locomotives today." Hill nodded slightly and said, "I can sign the contract on behalf of Buffett Banks. As long as Mr. Meg and the City Lord's castle agree to my conditions, we can draft the contract today. However, I suggest we find someone more professional to decide on the specifics." Dicus shook his head and said, "That's the City Lord's castle's condition. However, I think we need to discuss the specifics of the contract in detail before we can make a decision. Also, the City Lord will personally sign it. The City Lord's castle and young Mistress Hill are clearly more professional in this matter, so I'll have to trouble both of you to draft the contract. I won't participate in the operation and management. I will only provide the technology and receive remuneration. If possible, I hope you can keep my cooperation confidential." Meg looked at the two of them with a smile. Chapter 689. In the magic room on the second floor of the magic potion shop, Julian looked at Amy, who was making a snowman. He coughed lightly and said in a hoarse voice, little Amy. After this period of practice, you've become more proficient in the use of illusion magic. What we're going to do next is to endow the item with magical energy. Only then will it be able to exert its combat power in battle. Just like Master Julian's frost dragon that can spit out ice cubes, Amy's interest was immediately piqued. Julian nodded and said, "That's right. If an illusion is just a form, then it's nothing more than a trick to deceive people. If a magician's illusion can't make the item they create possess the characteristics and abilities of an illusion item, then it's a failure. Just like the fire phoenix that Crassus created, it's just a fighting rooster with the appearance of a fire phoenix." But Master Crassus's fighting rooster and Master Julian's frost dragon fought for a long time without a clear victor. Amy looked at Julian with a puzzled expression. Well, Julian's expression stiffened, and he didn't know how to respond for a moment. He coughed dryly and continued, "Now, let's start with endow the ability. First, choose an item that you think is the most powerful and create its appearance. Then, think about its abilities in your mind and think about how to make the item you create possess the same abilities. Also, I'll remind you one last time. You're not allowed to transform into Mr. Mac." Julian reminded her again. During this period of time, he hated seeing Meg the most. He felt like he was a transfer student who would appear in front of him almost every day. "I still think Father is the most powerful," Amy murmured softly. However, when she saw Julian's expression, she hesitated for a moment and fell into deep thought. Julian watched from the side. He wasn't in a hurry to teach Amy the method, nor did he give her any hints or suggestions. He had never seen anyone who was as talented as Amy in magic. Even Irina, who had amazed him in the past, was still a far cry from Amy. As for himself, he admitted that even if he had another brain, he was still not as talented as Amy. Therefore, he was more willing to give Amy directions and let her walk on her own. This was something that Crassus and he had a rare tacit understanding. To them, level 10 was already an insurmountable limit. Even though they were indeed much more powerful than ordinary level 10 great magicians, they were well aware that they were still within the realm of level 10. Therefore, they wanted to know if there was really someone in this world who could break through the shackles of level 10 and break through to level 11. Some people said that the Elven Queen was at level 11. However, even during the racial war, the Elven Queen had only fought a few times. No one knew how powerful she was, or if she was just a smokescreen released by the elves to raise their status on the continent. Julian and Crassus accepted Amy as their disciple at the same time, not only because they cherished her talent, but also because they had a tacit understanding. They both wanted to see if there was really a level above that. Amy closed her eyes. A ball of golden-orange light appeared above her head. It slowly gathered and then expanded. It looked quite magical. "This is..." Julian's eyes lit up. He looked at the scene with some anticipation. Successful ability bestowment was one of the hallmarks of a level 5 magician. Amy had only been learning magic for a little more than a month. From a complete novice to a level 4 magician, her speed of improvement was unprecedented. If she succeeded in ability bestowment, she would once again set a new record for the youngest level 5 magician. This might be something that would never be repeated in the future. The golden-orange light made Julian think of many magical beasts. Of course, this included the golden dragon. However, this was Amy's first attempt at ability bestowment. Even if the magical beasts were of a lower level, it was still a groundbreaking feat. The golden-orange light wriggled slowly. Then, it slowly shrank and became more solid. "This is that orange cat?" About 10 minutes later, Julian stared at the little orange cat that had appeared above Amy's head. His lips twitched, and he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Wow, it really is exactly the same." Amy also opened her eyes. She looked up at the little orange cat floating in the air and nodded with satisfaction. Little Amy, I meant for you to conjure up something that you think is the most powerful. Usually, it's some kind of powerful magical beast. Only then will it be able to unleash its full power in battle. You little cat." Although Julian had always followed the teaching philosophy of letting Amy unleash her true nature, he still couldn't remain calm at the sight of that adorable little orange cat. If he were to toss out an orange cat in battle, the best outcome would be to make the opponent laugh themselves to death. Master, this isn't a cat. It's Ugly Duckling, Amy emphasized seriously. Then, she pointed at Ugly Duckling and said, also, Ugly Duckling is really powerful. Julian still couldn't believe it. He looked at the orange cat and said, then, have you given it any ability? Try unleashing it on me. Duong. The entire building shook as a result. A huge cat-shaped meatball fell from the sky and pinned Julian underneath. Amy looked at Julian, whose upper body was exposed, and asked with concern, Master, are you all right? Julian's face was a little red, and he said with difficulty, I'm fine. But move this ball away from me first. The City Lord's castle and the hill were extremely efficient. The specific contract for the steam locomotive was drafted in 3 days and was approved by all 3 parties. Michael, the Hill, and Meg represented the 3 parties to sign the contract. Meg would get 10% of the profits. This contract was kept confidential according to Meg's request. No news of the steam engine's development would be announced to the public for 3 years. Meg also wouldn't have any contact with anyone else who was involved in the project except for Michael, the Hill, and Dicus. This was a form of protection for Meg. The steam locomotive was bound to cause a stir on the Norland continent. When the time came, if the various powers noticed him, they would inevitably target him, the developer, when they couldn't obtain the technology through normal channels. A man's wealth was his own ruin. Mag wasn't a fool. As for the development of the steam engine, the City Lord's castle made a new request. The City Lord's castle would invest a sum of money and take 10% of the shares. They wouldn't participate in any business activities, but they would allow the Buffett family to use the title of Chaos City. Meg would still take 20% of the shares, and the Buffett family would have full control over the operation. This is going to be the first technology company on the Norland continent. As expected, City Lord Michael has a good eye. Mag looked on as the 2 horse-drawn carriages disappeared into the distance, and a satisfied smile appeared on his face as he looked at the briefcase in his hand. We'll set off for Rodu in 9 days, and I hope you'll be able to make the necessary preparations, Mr. Meg. All right. Meg nodded as he looked on as Carol's departed. In the suede textile shop, all of the tailors were busy, and all of the employees were busy assisting the tailors. Not a single one of them had the time to rest. The empty storefront had been transformed into a small garment factory. More than 20 tailors were busy making clothes with their apprentices and assistants. These tailors weren't very renowned in Chaos City, but all of them had solid craftsmanship skills. It was already very good for them to receive 3 or 4 custom-made garments in a month, but that was barely enough to make a living. As such, when the suede textile shop offered them twice the usual price for each piece of clothing, almost no one could refuse such an offer. As long as they were diligent enough, their wages would be several times higher than normal, and all of them were extremely motivated. During these past few days, Gloria had spent almost all of her time in the shop, inspecting the quality and details of each and every piece of clothing. She wanted to ensure that all of the garments were of the highest quality and worth their price. Gloria made her way over to a female tailor who was busy embroidering patterns with her head lowered, and praised, Rebecca, your embroidery skills are really good. You'll be responsible for all of the collar embroidery for this batch of clothing. Rebecca hurriedly rose to her feet upon hearing that, and waved her hands in a slightly panicked manner as she said, Young mistress, I'm just an ordinary tailor. How can you entrust such an important task to me? I'm already very grateful to be able to work here. She had heeded Meg's advice to apply for a job at this shop. She had initially only wanted to give it a try, but she didn't think that she would actually be hired. The monthly salary that she was receiving was much higher than what she was receiving from other jobs, and it was enough for her to support herself and Jessica without having to rely on the City Lord's castle subsidies. Rebecca knew that Mr. Meg and young Mistress Gloria were definitely acquainted with one another, but she didn't slack off because of that. Instead, she worked even harder to complete her job. However, now that Gloria was going to let her embroider the collars of the garments, which were said to sell for hundreds of thousands of copper coins each. How could she possibly be worthy of such a position? Gloria shook her head with a smile and said, "You're more than qualified for this job. I hope that every customer will receive the most perfect clothing, so I can't do without you." Jessica looked at Gloria, and tears were already welling up in her eyes. Once upon a time, living was already a luxury to her, let alone hearing praise from others. This feeling of being recognized and respected was something that she hadn't felt in a long time. Gloria smiled and asked, "By the way, I heard that you have a daughter who sometimes plays outside the shop, right? Because the child is still young, and I'm the only one taking care of her, I asked her to come to the door during lunch and share half of my food with her. If young mistress doesn't like it, I'll tell her not to come again." Jessica's expression suddenly became a little nervous, and she hurriedly said. Gloria shook her head and said, "Of course not. What I want to say is that if the child is willing, you can bring her to work and let her play in the shop. It's fine as long as she doesn't disturb the master's work. I'll have them prepare an extra portion of food, so you don't have to share half of it with the child." Rebecca looked at Gloria in disbelief. A few days ago, Teacher Luna proposed to establish the first batch of funds for the foundation, and it won't be long before your child can go to school. But before that, let her accompany you in the shop. That way, you'll feel more at ease." Gloria continued. Thank you. Rebecca stood up and bowed deeply to Gloria. "Then, I'll leave the embroidery of this batch of garments to you." Gloria returned the bow with a smile. "Uncle Meg, will Uncle Blower be able to come back?" Chapter 691. Mag stood beside Anna and also looked out the window. It had begun to drizzle outside, and the pattering of the rain was silent, but there was not a single person on the streets. Perhaps he won't be able to come back. After all, he set up a death flag before he left, and I've added another one. Meg thought to himself. He looked down at Anna, who was wearing a concerned expression, and feigned a nonchalant smile as he said, "It's all right." Perhaps he was delayed by something important on his way back. Even if he doesn't come back today, he'll be back in a few days. Really? Anna looked up into Meg's eyes, trying to find an answer. Really? Mag nodded in a firm manner. In reality, he didn't really believe this either. Blower didn't seem to be very reliable, but from what he had said that day, Mag could deduce that what he was going to do this time was most likely not going to be a simple task. Then I'll wait for him for a while longer. Anna withdrew her gaze and looked out again. All right. Meg nodded and also stood by the window. He had met many people after coming to this world. Even though they weren't close friends, Mag still couldn't harden his heart. His mindset had changed a lot after all. The rain gradually became heavier, and the raindrops fell onto the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating a curtain of water that obscured the view. There was no sound of knocking on the door. Go to sleep first. He'll be back for sure. Meg looked at the clock on the wall to find that it was already midnight. He heaved an internal sigh as he patted Anna's head gently. Ding! The sound of a bell sounded from outside the door. It's Uncle Blower. Anna's eyes lit up as she rushed to the door and pushed the door open. The rain was swept in by the wind, drenching Anna's entire body. The bell hanging on the door jingled in the wind and rain, but there was no one in the dark, rainy night. Anna stood at the door with tears and rainwater flowing down her cheeks as she stood there in a daze. He'll be back. Meg closed the door gently and carried Anna upstairs. Meg changed Anna into a set of dry clothes, dried her hair, and gently placed her on the bed. Amy and Ugly Duckling were already sound asleep. Go to sleep. Perhaps he'll be back tomorrow morning, Meg said in a gentle voice as he tucked Anna under the thin blanket. Uncle Meg, am I a cursed elf? All those who are close to me have bad endings, Anna asked as she looked at Meg with tears in her eyes. Of course not. Anna is a good girl, not some cursed elf. Mag shook his head with a smile as he looked at Anna. Thank you, Uncle Mag, Anna said softly as she looked at Mag. She then turned around slowly with her back facing him. Mag stood beside the bed for a while as he looked at Anna with a sympathetic expression. What kind of things must she have gone through for her to have such thoughts? The wind forest, under the tree of life. Phyllis ran into the cave and panted as she looked at Irina, who was planting flowers under the tree, and said, "Your Highness, there hasn't been any news since the deal was canceled 3 days ago. Perhaps it's because you scared those people, but, Irina put aside the small watering can in her hand and looked at the two vibrant flowers in the soil. She nodded with satisfaction before looking up at Phyllis with furrowed brows and said, "Bean Sprout, speak properly." "But what?" "But I heard that they want you to represent the elven race at the birthday banquet of the king of the Roth Empire in 10 days. Phyllis finally said it out loud. "Really?" Irina was a little surprised. Phyllis hurriedly nodded and said, "It's already spread in the elven race. It's said that Mistress Helena proposed it to the queen, so it should have been decided." Irina's brows furrowed, and a thoughtful look appeared on her face. What is that old witch Helena up to again? She must be up to no good. Yes, I also think there must be a conspiracy. You have to be careful, Your Highness. Phyllis nodded in agreement. Could it be that this old witch knows that she can't represent the elven race with her looks, so she wants me to go to Rodu? Irina's expression became even more serious. Your thoughts are always so strange, Your Highness. Phyllis covered her face with her hand. She felt that her princess's brain was wired differently from that of normal people. It just so happens that I also want to make a trip to Rodu. It's time for me to settle some scores with those bastards from back then. A cold smile appeared on Irina's face as she said, "Bean Sprout, keep an eye on this place. Let me know if anything happens." "Yes, Your Highness." Phyllis nodded vigorously. Within a cave filled with stars, Heidi was wearing a black robe, and she was looking at Helena with a perplexed expression as she asked, "Mistress Helena, why do you want Irina to go to Rodu as the elven race's representative? There hasn't been any news of her in the past few years, and many of our elven race have already speculated that Her Majesty is displeased with her. If she goes to Rodu as the elven race's representative to celebrate the king's birthday, wouldn't those rumors be dispelled? Wouldn't that be very detrimental to us? Hasn't she always wanted to go to Rodu? I'll fulfill her wish." Helena stood on the platform and looked down at Heidi, who was like a black mouse as she said, "Those people aren't rats like you. They're not that easy to kill. If you push them too far, they'll bite." On the 7th day, there was no news of Blower. On the 8th day, there was no news of Blower. On the 14th day, there was no news of Blower. During this period of time, Anna had already stopped asking Meg about Blower. Instead, she would sit at the entrance of the restaurant for half an hour every day, as if she were waiting for something. Sally would sometimes accompany Anna to sit at the entrance of the restaurant in silence. Meg made a trip to the Elven embassy, and the Elven ambassador met with him, but he also didn't receive any news of Blower's disappearance. Even though he didn't want to admit it, it seemed that Blower really wasn't coming back. Amy and I are going to the capital of the Rodu Empire tomorrow to cook for the king's birthday banquet. As such, the restaurant will be closed for 5 days. Barbara, you and Anna can continue to stay in the restaurant. I'll give you the keys, and I'll also give you some money for your living expenses. If you can't find a way to settle your own expenses, you can go outside to eat. Mia, the ice cream shop can continue to operate, but you can also take a break for a few days. Just treat it as a short vacation. We'll be back in 5 days. Chapter 692. Early in the morning, a horse-drawn carriage departed from Amy's and headed toward the northern part of the city. Amy held Ugly Duckling in her arms as she turned to Meg with excitement in her eyes and asked, "Father, are we really going to Rodu today? That megacity that Teacher Luna mentioned is inhabited only by humans? And there's a lot of delicious food there?" Meg nodded with a smile and replied, "That's right. That's a big city, and it's mostly populated by humans. But if you want to eat good food, I can cook for you, Amy. I promise it'll be better than the food outside. But I want to eat super delicious food. Can Father cook for me? How about we go to Rodu? I'll treat Father to some delicious food, and Father can cook for me after we get to eat good food, Amy said with a conflicted expression. Does Amy still have a secret stash of money? Meg looked at Amy with a smile. Didn't she give all of her secret stash to Luna a few days ago? That's right. I still have a copper coin. I picked it up when I came back with Teacher Crassus yesterday. Crassus didn't want half of it, so he gave it all to me. Amy opened her little hand, and there was a shimmering copper coin in her hand. Meow, Ugly Duckling made its way over and licked Amy's little hand with its little tongue as it looked at Amy with a fawning expression. Amy looked down at Ugly Duckling with a determined expression and said, "Don't even think about it, Ugly Duckling. You're not allowed to eat supper or meat in the future. If you continue to get fat like this, the carriage is going to collapse under your weight." Meow, Ugly Duckling lowered its head with an aggrieved expression. Did Teacher Crassus say anything when you went to class yesterday? Meg asked with a smile. He praised me. He said that I'm comparable to him back in the day. Amy nodded before hesitantly saying, but I feel like he was belittling me. You didn't say that to Teacher Crassus, did you? Meg couldn't help but chuckle. I didn't tell him. Amy shook her head and muttered, but when I was muttering, he heard me. Then his old injury acted up, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. He's lucky that he didn't die from anger. Meg smiled and shook his head. As his daughter's teacher, he had to have a better attitude. Amy's eyes suddenly lit up, and she said, by the way, Teacher Crassus also said that he's going to Rodu tomorrow, and he invited me to go with him, but I refused. Crassus is also going to Rodu? Meg was a little surprised to hear this. That's right. Teacher Crassus must have been worried that I would fall behind in my homework, so he followed me to Rodu. Teacher Julian is the best. He never even gives me homework. Come to think of it, Teacher Crassus will be teaching the next few days, and every time he takes a leave of absence, he's always a little unlucky. Meg shook his head with a smile. If Crassus was also going to Rodu, then their trip would be much safer. With how much Crassus doted on Amy, there was no way that he would allow Amy to fall into danger. As such, he would be able to do some things without holding back. The horse-drawn carriage traveled for close to an hour before stopping at the northern city gate. Meg carried Amy out of the horse-drawn carriage, and the coachman and 2 servants came forward to pick up the luggage in the carriage. Wow, Father, look. There's a huge bird over there. Before Meg had a chance to find the bird, Amy was already pointing to the left with an excited expression. Meg turned to find a huge black bird with a wingspan of over 30 meters lying on the ground beside the city wall. Even though it was lying on its stomach, it was still around 3 to 4 meters tall, making it look like an airplane. The bird resembled an eagle, but it wasn't as sharp and unruly as an eagle. Its massive head seemed to have been sliced in half, and there was only a flat surface above its head. Its blue eyes appeared to be quite docile, and it was currently eating fist-sized beans with its head lowered. Aside from its head, everything else was completely still. This was a common flying steed on the Norland continent, the flat-headed falcon. It wasn't very fast among flying steeds, but it was renowned for its docility and ability to carry heavy loads. It was a must-have choice for wealthy families on long-distance trips. Meg was no stranger to this bird, but he was still quite stunned to see it in person. There were many seats and boxes fixed to the bird's back and wings. A long ladder had been set up on the bird's back, and workers were climbing onto the bird's back with boxes and luggage. Carols was standing beside the bird, and he was conversing with 2 officials who appeared to be from the city lord's castle with smiles on their faces. He raised a hand to signal to Meg and the others before continuing with their conversation. Meanwhile, his son, Elijah, was standing beside him with a gloomy expression. He faltered slightly at the sight of Meg, and a hint of rage immediately appeared in his eyes as he clenched his fists tightly. Meg took note of Elijah's actions. He didn't have much of an impression of this ambassador's son, and he didn't know when he had incurred his father's wrath. However, he didn't take this matter to heart. He had seen many young masters like him in his past life, all of whom bullied the weak and feared the strong. Meg was just about to walk toward the bird with Amy in his arms when a horse-drawn carriage stopped beside Meg. The curtains of the carriage were lifted, and a young woman in a gray linen dress emerged from within. Miss Luna? Teacher Luna. Mr. Meg, Amy. All three of them greeted in unison. Meg turned to Luna with a hint of surprise on his face, while Amy was elated. Chapter 693. A hemispherical magic barrier rose up, enshrouding all of the people and goods on the bird's back. The giant bird flapped its wings and continued to rise higher and higher. In the blink of an eye, the buildings on the ground had been reduced to small boxes, giving them a panoramic view of the entire Chaos City. Wow, it's so fun to fly. Father, look, that's the Aiden Square, and our restaurant is in the corner. It looks like a small box from here. Amy exclaimed excitedly. She lowered her head and looked down without a hint of fear. Father, look, that's the Aiden Square. However, Ugly Duckling wasn't as calm as it was in her arms. It hugged its eyes with its hands and plunged its butt into Amy's arms as it trembled uncontrollably. However, this was the first time that Mag had experienced flying on a large bird's back, so he was naturally not afraid of flying. As such, he was naturally quite excited, and he didn't try to hide his excitement in the slightest. The speed of this giant bird naturally couldn't compare with that of a plane, but flying in the air was naturally much faster than traveling on land. According to Carol's, they should be able to reach Rodu by nightfall. Meg took a moment to glance at Luna, only to find that she was also quite calm and collected. It appeared that this wasn't her first time riding on a flying steed, so she really was quite an extraordinary figure. Country bumpkins. Elijah took a glance at Mag and Amy and pursed his lips with disdain. He was just sitting on the most ordinary flying magic beast, yet he was already so excited. Why was his father holding him in such high regard? It was truly perplexing. Elijah's gaze then fell on Luna, and he surreptitiously appraised her as he nodded to himself. This young Mistress Luna is quite beautiful. Compared to those mediocre women, her intellectual temperament is quite captivating. If that Gloria doesn't agree, then I can consider asking Father to propose marriage to her family. Meg noticed all of Elijah's little movements, but he wasn't too worried about Luna. According to Carol's attitude towards Luna, her family's strength and reputation should be above Carol's. If Elijah wanted to do anything, he would have to consider his own status. Ugly Duckling, you can't be like this. As a duck, how can you be afraid of heights? Chaos City gradually disappeared from sight. Amy withdrew her gaze and looked down at the trembling Ugly Duckling in her arms. Ugly Duckling was still covering its eyes, and it didn't utter a single sound as it buried its head even deeper into the ground. If you can't fly, then you don't deserve to be called a white swan. If you're not a white swan, then I won't be able to eat roast goose. Amy looked at Ugly Duckling with a serious expression. So, I'm going to start training you to adapt to the sky now. Meg looked at Amy with an intrigued expression. The city walls were over 100 meters tall and 30 meters thick, and there were countless magic caster runes engraved on them. Even the forest trolls wouldn't be able to easily scale them. Regardless of whether it was in terms of population or size, Rodu could be regarded as the largest city on the continent. Wow, Teacher Luna, is that Rodu? It's so big. Amy's eyes widened. Yes, that's Rodu, my hometown. Luna nodded with excitement on her face. The last time she had been home was over a year ago, but she still found this city to be very adorable. Meg looked at the city with complex emotions. With Alex's memories, he was naturally very familiar with the capital of the Roth Empire. This was a city that symbolized the human race, and it was the place that he had sworn to protect. Ever since he stepped into this city at the age of 15, he gradually rose to the highest level of power in the Roth Empire. However, it was also in this city that he fell into the dust. The flathead eagle landed at the city gate, attracting the attention of many normal people who were lining up to enter the city. Everyone disembarked from the eagle's back, and a horse-drawn carriage had already arrived to pick up Luna. Luna looked at Meg with a smile and said, Mr. Meg, I'll go back and report to my grandfather first. After you cook for the king, I'll arrange for you to meet him. Would that be all right? Sure. Meg nodded with a smile. He had nothing to do anyway. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.